Chapter 485. Hurry! Hurry! At the same time, Sienna and Viscount Henri were desperately kicking their horses' bellies as they ran out of the forest. Their troops were stretched thin by the trees, and could not form a proper formation at all. However, no one had the time to care about the so-called honor guard, because there were more than 20 wolf riders chasing after them. Although they were careful not to make a sound, the orcs' search network was too wide. When a team of wolf riders discovered them, they immediately gave chase. Although Sienna had bragged about killing a bunch of orcs, he did not dare to fight them face to face. Seeing this, he immediately shouted retreat and turned his horse around. This action immediately caused the private troops to collapse without a fight. Viscount Henri, on the other hand, did not know how to fight at all. He could only grit his teeth and run with the others. However, they were not good horsemanship. They could only watch helplessly as the private troops behind them were killed by the orcs one by one. If this continued, no one would escape death. However, at this moment, the sound of a horn suddenly came from afar. The next moment, the orc wolf riders immediately abandoned them and turned around to run in the direction of the sound. "What's going on?" Panting heavily, Viscount Henri kept looking back. After 3 or 4 seconds, he finally confirmed that he was out of danger. However, as soon as his horse slowed down, Sienna, who was beside him, whipped his horse's butt. Smack! The charging horse almost threw Henri to the ground. He looked over in confusion, only to see Sienna growling, "Do you think it's over? Leave now. Go back to the city. It's only safe to go back to the city." Henri was no fool either. She immediately caught up to Sienna, who had not stopped at all. The two of them quickly led the sparse group out of the forest and took a detour to Picaro City. Looking back at the hellish forest behind them, Viscount Henri wanted to ask, "What about the others?" But when she saw that Sienna was not even looking back, she swallowed her words in the end. Towards those nobles who used to drink and chat merrily with him, Henri did not think about sharing weal and woe at this moment. Only his own life mattered. Everything else was nonsense. Leave it to fate. I don't have the ability to save you anyway. That was what Viscount Henri thought. In the forest, Catherine, who had resigned herself to fate, was on the verge of a mental breakdown. Hiding in the tree hole didn't mean that everything was fine. The hunting area was only so big. With over 600 orc wolf riders spread out, they could quickly search the entire area. This also caused the areas that the wolf riders patrolled to overlap. To Catherine, this overlap caused her to always be able to hear the footsteps of mount wolves not far away. She could even hear the orcs' happy cheers. These noises were sometimes near and far, causing Catherine to not even dare to breathe loudly. Within dozens of minutes, she had been bitten countless times by all kinds of mosquitoes, but she, who was usually pampered and spoiled, had clenched her teeth and endured it. Desperate situations could make people collapse, but they could also make people stronger. However, Kathleen felt that her toughness had come a little too late. His 5 private soldiers had already fled in all directions in the previous battle, and it was unknown how many of them had survived. Catherine's mind was in a mess. She didn't know what to think. After an unknown amount of time, the sound of rustling footsteps made her hold her breath again. A team of 10 or so wolf riders stopped about 10 meters in front of her and began to recuperate. Catherine's heart was in her throat. She tried her best to shrink into the tree hole, which wasn't very deep, in an attempt to hide her body. However, a mount wolf with a keen sense of smell suddenly turned its head and looked at her. Then, it took large strides towards her. The gigantic wolf head was daunting to look at. The saliva dripping from it and the deep growl made Catherine's face turn pale instantly. The wolf cavalry soldiers at the side noticed that something was wrong and immediately came over to check on her. Unsurprisingly, Catherine was seen clearly by the wolf cavalry soldiers. The tall orc was shocked at first. Then, he reached out and pulled Catherine out of the tree hole. When they saw her curvaceous figure, The eyes of the orcs around them instantly lit up. They immediately surrounded her while howling. What happened next could already be foreseen. Catherine's heart was like dead ashes. She closed her eyes in despair. She was violently pressed to the ground. But when the group of orcs were arguing about who should enjoy first, Catherine, whose ears were forced to stick to the ground, suddenly heard a dull sound of hooves. The next moment, she saw the orcs immediately jump onto the mount wolves and rush into the distance while shouting loudly. And after the sounds of fighting, 2 wolf riders ran past Catherine with faces full of fear. Catherine endured the pain from the fall and stood up. She strode forward for a few dozen meters. When she finally saw the group of soldiers wearing light armor and waving their swords to kill the orcs, the noble girl finally couldn't help but cry out and sat on the ground. After all her tense emotions were relaxed, her body seemed to have lost its strength. She sat on the ground and watched the soldiers in front of her deal with the battlefield in an orderly manner. They executed the mount wolves and the injured orcs. Then, they quickly organized and sent out scouting teams to explore in all directions. When Catherine's existence was discovered, someone immediately came over to help her into the team. She could hear words like still alive, not injured, no treatment, no potions, and so on. Not long after, someone stuffed a water bag into her hands. Catherine's movements were stiff as she pulled out the stopper. The cold water instantly made her sober up. She looked around and found that there were many acquaintances. Baron Coleman? Baron Nelton? The other party's condition was similar to Catherine's. They were covered in dust and looked extremely pathetic. When they heard someone calling their name, they turned around. They were surprised at first, but then they sighed. "Catherine? You're lucky, better than your father." This sentence immediately caused Catherine to freeze on the spot. How my father, was killed by the wolf riders. Not only him, but most of them. If it wasn't for this team that saved us, I'm afraid everyone would have died in the hands of these guys. Catherine had experienced several ups and downs in her life in just an hour. She felt uncomfortable in her chest, but at this time, she could not care less about her sorrow. After trying hard to breathe a few times, she asked, "Then what should we do now? What are we doing? Should we follow the team?" "I don't know. Sally Duke told us not to get in the way. She said leave the rest to the soldiers." "Sally Duke?" Catherine turned around and looked at the clear formation of the troops in front of her. She soon saw Duke, who was dressed in white and holding a magic staff. After hearing the news of her father's death, Catherine had become the only person in charge of the Burton family. So, she secretly made up her mind. Even if the family was previously opposed to this Duke, from now on she would completely reverse it. But soon, Catherine discovered that Sally Duke did not seem to be the leader of this team. "Thank you monthly tickets. Fantasy Star Mark, Succubus cannot afford to hurt, Fugra." Chapter 486. Why? Why do you want to confiscate my horses? At this moment, an argument suddenly broke out in the team. Catherine turned her head and saw 3 domineering viscounts and barons arguing with Sodeler. "What are they doing?" Kathleen asked in confusion. "Those fellows weren't attacked. I'm afraid they don't know the seriousness of the matter." Baron Coleman, who was covered in blood, shook his head. "This team is working hard to rescue the other noble teams in the forest, but some of them were taken in before they even saw the orcs. They probably think they can handle everything." This answer made Catherine realize something. Because they were ignorant, they were fearless. Before facing the cold blade, the nobles had no fear of the orcs. So, this group of fellows' reaction was expected. But the more it was like this, the more Catherine realized how childish she had been. She looked at the few fellows who kept arguing and scolded in a low voice. A bunch of idiots. Roddy's team had already saved 22 nobles along the way. Some of them were survivors, while others, like Catherine, only had 1 or 2 people left in the entire team. Some of them hadn't been attacked, so they naturally met with resistance when they requisitioned horses in order to expand the scouting team. Those who had been attacked by the orcs, after witnessing Rhodey leading a team to kill the orcs, obediently handed over all their resources. They knew that their private soldiers were a burden to the orcs. On the other hand, the nobles with shiny armor and military prowess all agreed that Sally and Duke were making a mountain out of a molehill. None of them were willing to cooperate. Seeing this situation, Sodeler didn't say anything and directly waved his hand at the troublemakers and said, "If you don't want to give it, don't. But those who ride horses must obey orders and carry out the mission. Do you understand? Why? I am also the lord of the kingdom. What right do you have to order me?" Viscount Juan, who had a big belly and a full beard, questioned loudly. "Not only did you drag me into the team by force, but you also want my horses and troop. What are you trying to do? You are that Baron Parr, right? You made a lot of money last winter. It's fine if you did it in secret, but now you're brazenly robbing me?" Sodeler's expression became gloomy. He didn't expect that the people he had saved out of kindness would be this kind of trash, but he was still soft-hearted and didn't want to see these nobles being slaughtered by the beastmen. He suppressed his anger and said, "This is a very dangerous time, and the forest is very dangerous. That's all I have to say. Take your team and follow us. Who would believe your nonsense?" Viscount Juan pointed at Sodeler without any trace of politeness. But just as he finished speaking, Roddy's voice suddenly came from the side. "It's up to you to believe it. If you don't, scram." Riding on the train king, he exuded a murderous aura, forcing the nobles to take a few steps back. However, Roddy ignored them. He first gestured to Sodeler to continue leading the search and rescue team. Then, his gaze turned cold as he looked at the protesting nobles. "I won't repeat myself. If you want to scram, scram immediately. I don't need useless teammates." The three nobles wanted to say something, but they saw that the soldiers beside Roddy had already opened up a path for them. Nobles cared about their reputation the most. Since things had already reached this point, there was nothing more to say. They coldly snorted and led more than 60 private soldiers away from this large army of more than 400 people. Soon, they disappeared into the forest. Catherine witnessed everything with her own eyes. But compared to Roddy's merciless banishment, she was more shocked by his current status. She turned to the Viscount beside her and asked, "This country bumpkin. Oh no, why is Baron Roddy here? He seems to have a lot of power?" "You just joined the team, so you might not know. Those soldiers who killed the beastmen head-on were Baron Roddy's subordinate. He is the current commander-in-chief of this team. Even Sally and Duke are only assisting from the side. Speaking of which, it's all thanks to his protection that we can live until now. I heard people say that in the first battle, he single-handedly took out 30 wolf cavalry soldiers. How is this possible?" Catherine's heart was in turmoil. She then looked at Roddy. The latter just happened to turn around and said to the nobles around him, "If anyone wants to leave, please leave immediately. I don't want to talk too much nonsense." Roddy's eyes were filled with deep exhaustion. He did not even bother to say a few more words and directly turned around to leave. That lonely back gradually overlapped with the inconspicuous country bumpkin at the banquet yesterday. It made it difficult for Catherine to accept the huge change in this for a moment. Everyone has to pay the price for their own choices. Catherine suddenly remembered Roddy's words. She, who did not delve into it, finally realized a fact. She used to live in a beautiful dream. When she woke up from the dream, all the beauty created in the dream would dissipate. And when she opened her eyes, all she could see was the bloody scene in front of her. Catherine could not help but rejoice in her heart. Compared to those who had left the team, she woke up earlier. And the nobles who were still arrogant and conceited would eventually pay the price. Was it cruel to throw these people into the forest to face the orcs? From the perspective of the nobles, Roddy was actually pushing them into the fire pit. but Catherine understood that this was actually the wisest choice. The kingdom was not good at cooperation, but it was definitely an expert at holding back. Leaving this group of scourges in the team would definitely cause trouble for everyone at a critical moment. Sodeler could not do this. The justice in his heart was an absolutely idealized justice, benevolent to everyone, loving everyone, tolerant of everything, but Roddy was tired of this moral restraint after being repeatedly framed by the kingdom's nobles. He only looked at the goal and result, and was not interested in pursuing anything else at all. Since they had to do their best to ensure everyone's survival, then these people who could possibly threaten the team must be driven out. In times of prosperity there are many saints, and in times of chaos there are ambitious people. Roddy was not interested in being a sucker, so he had to take this path. At this time, the scouts were continuously reporting back. Through preliminary surveys of the corpses in the forest, it was confirmed that more than 20 noble teams had been killed. And at this time, Roddy's team had also reached the limit of the number of people they could rescue. In war, numbers were not enough. Most private soldiers did not have the strength to fight against the orcs. To be on the safe side, he had to move the entire team to Picaro City and withdraw into the city as soon as possible to be safe. As for the other nobles in the forest, Roddy no longer had the intention of saving them. He was not the Virgin Mary. He did not want to do something like losing sight of the bigger picture. And just as the team was about to change direction, the needle-tail sand cone hovering in the sky suddenly swooped down towards the ground. Before the Kelda duck could land, Natha leaped down from the sky, reached out to grab a tree trunk, and jumped a few times before landing on the ground. 3 kilometers to the north, an orc troop is gathering and approaching. There are nearly 300 of them. The news she brought made everyone pause in their footstep. Although 300 wolf riders could not compare to the current team of more than 400 people, in terms of combat power, Roddy's battle-ready troops would not be able to stop them at all. After nearly 10 charges and small-scale battles, the stamina of all the cavalry and infantry had greatly decreased. Although they did not lose many people, they no longer had the sharpness and drive they had at the beginning. Moreover, the team was complicated and could not be coordinated. If someone suddenly fled during the battle, the consequences would be unimaginable. Now that things had come to this, Roddy only had one choice left: bring everyone and rush at full speed to Picaro City. Roddy's decision was decisive, and no one in the team had any room to object. Because everyone knew the consequences of being a step slower, even the nobles who usually did not take the same route gritted their teeth and followed the team. Those who could walk walked, and those who were too old were given horses to follow. Catherine was the only female noble who was rescued in the team. She was originally given a horse, but she waved her hand and chose to refuse. She gritted her teeth and followed the team. Perhaps because of her actions, some of the viscounts and barons who were originally riding on horses also felt that it was a waste of resources to ride horses. They all dismounted and walked, returning the horses to the cavalry who were guarding the perimeter. In the end, there were not many truly stupid nobles. As elites, they were all very clear about one thing. The most life-saving thing at the moment was not the war horses, but the soldiers with combat power. Roddy personally led the team to bring up the rear, while Knight Wellington led the way in front. Everyone in the team of more than 400 people was tense, and they almost trotted all the way out of the forest. In the middle of the team, Naifei bit her lips, and her always lively little face was full of depression. Akasha had been beside her, of course she noticed this. When the team moved forward in silence, she finally asked, "Naifei, do you think you did something wrong?" Naifei raised her head, but did not know what to say. She just insisted on staying. Why did it make Roddy angry? Ever since she knew Roddy, she had never seen Roddy have such a reaction. Naifei was very nervous. She did not like the feeling of hurting others. In fact, You did not do anything wrong. Akasha looked forward, reached out her hand and pushed the branches in front of her away and said calmly, "It was his thinking that went wrong." Naifei slightly opened her mouth. She was actually not close to Akasha, because her mother Camilla did not like this priest, so Naifei rarely communicated with her. But Naifei was very clear that the priest in front of her with a calm face was Roddy's partner. She and Roddy had a very good relationship, and Naifei often saw them together intimately, but why did she say so? Do you think that if you like a person, you must say good things about him? The doubt in Naifei's eyes could not be hidden from Akasha. She smiled and said, "Everyone has shortcomings and has a past that they are not willing to talk about. His attitude towards you is actually a bit extreme. He wants you to live a stable and happy life, so he tried his best to do it, but he did not consider your feelings." Chapter 487. I just don't want to cause trouble for him. But now that I think about it, it seems that I'm the one who is causing trouble for him. Naifei felt a little awkward. Of course, she liked being spoiled by Roddy. After all, no girl would reject the feeling of being spoiled by someone. But when this kind of spoiling was too excessive, the consequences would be unimaginable. War itself is troublesome. You're an arcanist, not those wounded soldiers. Akasha looked at the girl in front of her. She did not say any nonsense like, "You have to pull yourself together." Instead, she just helped her tidy up her robe. If you have the ability, you have to use it. If there's a problem, you have to solve it. If you don't treat yourself as a child, then do what you should do. Only Roddy is protecting you. Haven't you thought about protecting him? This was actually Akasha's question in her heart. From the time she was saved by Roddy until now, she had actually been living this sentence. Naifei stared at her blankly, as if it was the first time she met Akasha. She nodded as if she understood. Akasha did not say anything more. After drinking half a bottle of magic potion, she continued to patrol the wounded soldiers. Naifei quickly came back to her senses. She took out her wand and looked around. She immediately began to use level 0 spells such as levitation and magician's hand to help the soldiers move faster. As the spells were released one by one, many slow-moving wounded soldiers quickly caught up with the team. Thus, the whole team moved a lot faster. At this time, she finally found her place in this team. But Roddy, who was at the back of the team, did not notice this at this time. He was anxiously watching the team moving slowly, thinking about the enemy's movement. In the past, the team always moved together. They had never carried so many burdens together. At this time, the marching speed was much slower than he expected. But there was no other way. If the enemy caught up with them immediately, they could only choose to delay as much as possible. Natha once again stepped on the needle-tail sand cone and went forward to scout. The effect of a ranger and a flying pet was undoubtedly outstanding in this battle. The ability of aerial reconnaissance gave Roddy the initiative on the battlefield. Even if he had to voluntarily retreat, it was still much better than passively taking a beating. Sodeler's expression was cold, and Roddy knew that he was actually unhappy that he hadn't been able to kill Sienna, but the march was more important, so no one brought up this topic again. The Dragon Spear Knights followed behind the team in silence and order. Time passed slowly. 20 minutes later, the team left the edge of Da Vinci Forest. At this time, Natha's warning had yet to appear. When they passed by the camp that had been massacred, the entire team did not stop at all. However, when they saw the small hill of human heads on the grass, everyone's faces turned extremely ugly. Especially when they saw those noble girls who had been humiliated to death. Catherine and the other nobles' breathing became hurried, but no one dared to stop. Instead, they sped up. They all knew one thing. If they were caught by the orcs behind them, they would definitely meet the same end. Lady Luck seemed to be protecting this team, or perhaps the 3 confident barons had taken the bullet for them. After Goddard fought fiercely for a while, He was extremely disappointed to find that this group of fellows were not the enemies he was looking for. He did not believe that this group of weak private soldiers could kill his elite subordinates, so after a short rest, he continued his search. When the Wolf Riders finally confirmed that a team of 400 had left the forest, Roddy and the others had already reached the outskirts of Picaro City. Needle-tailed sand owls streaked across the sky, and the sound of arrows rang out, indicating that the Wolf Riders behind them had already discovered their tracks and would arrive in half an hour. However, for Roddy and the others, they could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The soldiers panted and stopped in their tracks, and the nobles looked at the greenish-gray stone city walls, silently thanking the gods. Many of their armor had long been soaked in sweat, and Catherine's salls had a few blisters. More than 10 barons and viscounts following on foot sat on the ground with pale faces. As long as they entered the city, these Wolf Riders would not be a threat to them. With such thoughts in mind, the team of more than 400 people rushed straight to the city walls. But what surprised them was that Picaro City had actually closed all the city gates. "Guards! Open the gates! Let us in!" An impatient noble shouted upwards, but the soldiers standing behind the wall poked their heads out, took a few glances, and then shrunk back, not responding. "Guards, I am Lord Sally of Efta, Lucifron. As the Duke of the Kingdom, I order you to open the city gates." Roddy, Sodeler, Wellington, Titus, and the others crowded around Sally. As the Lord, she did not let her subordinates shout, and directly made her request. But the reply she got was a rather familiar voice. "Kill her! She is a traitor of the kingdom who colluded with the orcs." Following these words, more than 10 crossbow bolts suddenly rained down from the city walls. Sally's expression changed, but she did not dodge. When the arrows came, at least 5 kinds of shields appeared in front of her. The Knight's Battle Aura shield, Akasha's Divine Spell shield, and Nephi's Arcane Spell shield were cast in an instant, directly repelling the arrows. On the other hand, Roddy raised his bow and counterattacked. He killed 3 guards who were closer to him. This counterattack stunned the soldiers on the city walls, and their firepower suddenly stopped. "Kill him! Use the ballista, idiots!" However, a few flustered and exasperated shouts could be heard from the walls, followed by the sound of the huge ballista capstan turning. Roddy and Sodeler looked at each other with grim expressions. They could tell that the person who spoke was Sienna. "Retreat!" Sodeler immediately retreated with his men, while Roddy directly switched to explosive arrows and shot upwards. The accurate arrows blew up the ballista that was rotating on the pedestal, and at the same time, killed several soldiers who were operating it. "Kill him! Shoot! All of you, stand up and shoot!" Sienna's voice was no longer disguised. His actions made Roddy feel an unprecedented anger. Since the enemy dared to directly attack Sally, Picaro City was probably no longer a shelter for this team, and exposed to the threat of the Orc Wolf Riders in the wilderness, this team was definitely doomed. This was a classic case of one's own people harming one's own people. The mayor, Baron Panini, had already been killed, and Sienna was a rather prestigious noble. After he and Viscount Henru returned, they quickly took control of the original city defense, with the help of the 4 orc heads, and quickly arranged their own soldiers to defend the city. So now, only Viscount Henru's guards were on the city walls. Faced with 2 arch-enemies, Roddy knew that the city gates could not be opened. He really wanted to kill his way up the city walls, but Picaro City was not a small fortress. The 17 to 18 meters tall walls had stood for 200 to 300 years, and without siege weapons, it was impossible to climb up. More and more soldiers appeared on the city walls. Under the rain of arrows, Roddy could only retreat. However, he still continued to shoot under the cover of the 4 defensive panels, forcibly suppressing the firepower on half of the city walls. He only stopped when the troops behind him had all retreated to a distance of 200 meters. At this time, the atmosphere in the team had fallen into an unprecedented awkwardness. Other than Sally and the others, the rescued nobles like Catherine could not imagine that they would encounter the problem of having a city but not being able to enter. When they came to ask for the reason, the truth of the matter made most of them speechless. The Milner family had colluded with the Viper Cross assassination plan. They had used the mine auction to attract most of the nobles. The orcs' sudden attack and massacre. The nobles never believed in coincidences. When the city gates were closed and everyone was forced to face the enemy, everyone had to admit one thing: they had all been tricked. Now that things have come to this, Sienna still has the cheek to call me a traitor. I wonder who the real traitor is. Sally was extremely sensitive to this word. Back then, her brother, Francis, had colluded with the orcs to kill her. She had thought that no one in the kingdom would be so crazy, but who knew that Sienna would actually do the same thing? She was furious, but there was nothing she could do. What do we do now? Do we turn back and fight the orcs? Looking back, the nobles and soldiers in the team were all travel-worn. Because they had rushed all the way, most of them were sitting on the ground, panting heavily from exhaustion. Titus and Wellington did not make any random suggestions. They only pressed their swords forward, silently expressing their loyalty. Sodeler did not speak. He had rich experience on the battlefield, and naturally understood the consequences of a head-on battle. Although the Dragon Lance Knights were well-equipped and the barbarian infantrymen were also strong, it did not mean that they were battle puppets with unlimited stamina. Soldiers without stamina were no different from civilians. At this time, a head-on battle was basically courting death. But he still did not speak. At this moment of life and death, if he really had to lead the troops forward, Sodeler would still not have any hesitation. Why don't we hide in the nearby village? Where's the nearest stronghold? Where should we go? The nearby nobles also asked in low voices, but their eyes were filled with confusion. Most of them knew nothing about military affairs, and their judgment at this time was not even as good as that of the few Grand Knights. And at this time, Roddy, who had been silent all this time, finally said after scanning the map column, "Now is not the time for a battle. Even if we fight, we have to delay it until tomorrow." The surroundings quieted down, and everyone looked at the temporary commander. The orcs will not move at night because they are generally night-blind. Once it is dark, they will stop chasing. As long as they do not catch up before sunset, we still have a chance. His words immediately caused a huge uproar. Really? Orcs are night-blind? How do you know? The nobles who did not understand the orcs questioned, but Roddy did not bother to explain. He jumped off the train king and used a dagger to draw a simple map on the compacted dirt road in front of the city. He frowned and said to Sally and the 3 Grand Knights, "The orcs are chasing from the north, and they will probably arrive soon. If we go around the city now, enter the forest from the southeast, and hide our tracks, then go around in a circle and rush back to the Da Vinci Forest, they will not be able to find us in a short time. Then we will march towards the village in the east of the forest. If the team can get supplies in the village at night, then tomorrow morning, the soldiers will have the strength to fight back." "That is too risky," a noble beside him interrupted. "If we don't take the risk, we will die." Roddy directly interrupted him and lifted his foot to flatten the map. His expression was frighteningly calm. "Die now or let them die tomorrow, which will you choose? Thanks for monthly votes. Lonely Floating Clouds, Shuffle 76 ****, Farmer 007, Go to Hell, Fantasy Windchime, FGGGGWRE, Jeremy thanks for supporting. Strengthened Barrett P. S. I saw some people saying that the style of writing has become more white. Actually, I do not know what your standard for judging white is. I have always been committed to constantly changing and improving my writing style. Seriously speaking, every single volume of this book will have a different style. This is because I am constantly trying new writing styles. If I see a writing style that is well received by the readers, I will immediately copy it and not change it. That would be really boring. Chapter 488. Roddy's team was the only one with the highest authority in the team regarding the orc's habit. No one else knew about the orc's night blindness, but Roddy had already used this fact to raid the orc camp 2 years ago. With this achievement in front of them, all the voices of dissent disappeared. Thus, the team immediately turned around and tried their best to clean up their tracks as they moved. The team of 400 ran from the north gate to the south gate in an anti-clockwise direction. They gritted their teeth and marched for more than 30 minutes. Finally, they made a big detour under the threat of scattered arrows on the south wall and safely entered the forest in the southeast of Picaro City, disappearing from Viscount Sienna's sight. Run! You're all going to die sooner or later. Sienna finally dared to poke his head out from behind the wall. He was really afraid of Roddy's terrifying archery. The scene of Roddy taking on the wolf riders alone had become a nightmare that he could not forget. Now that he saw Roddy running away, he was so afraid of revenge that he could not even eat or sleep in peace. I'm the heir of the Milner family. Why should I be afraid of a bullsh *T Baron? He took a deep breath and tried hard to suppress the panic in his heart. He asked the soldier beside him, "Where are the pigeons? I want to write a letter and send it out now." Sienna knew very well that after his private army was wiped out, he could only rely on Viscount Henri's soldiers to control the situation. However, he could not order Henri around as a subordinate. Thus, the most important thing now was to get his father to send troops over to help, the sooner the better, but before he could even take a few steps, a soldier on the city wall shouted, "The orcs are here! The orcs are here!" So what if they're here? Do they dare to attack the city? We just have to guard the city gate. Sienna cursed in exasperation and rode his horse back to the north wall. Then, he saw the scene of hundreds of wolf riders gathering. These orcs had never seen a city of this scale. The grayish-green city wall that was more than 10 meters tall struck fear into their hearts. Even Goddard had to admit that once the city gate was closed, attacking the city would be utter nonsense. I can't believe they were one step ahead of us. These rabbit-like humans. Goddard spat and felt a little annoyed. They had already locked onto Roddy's team, but they still ended up on the other side of the city. Facing this situation, Goddard, who only had a little understanding of human cities, naturally thought that they had entered the city. What else would these cowardly humans dare to do if they didn't enter the city? If it was Goddard leading the team, he would also choose to rely on the city walls to protect himself. This was the reason why Roddy had chosen to circle around. If he had entered the forest directly from the east side of the city, then the beastmen behind him would be able to lock onto their position and determine their intentions. However, after using the blind spots to evade their vision, these wolf riders could only be angry that they were a step too late. It never occurred to them that their target had already escaped right under their noses. Roddy, who had already entered the forest, finally relaxed his furrowed brows. Not only him, but all the tense nobles and soldiers in the team also heaved a long sigh of relief. Those who had been complaining previously were now convinced. Many barons even specially came to apologize for their previous rudeness. Although there was a lot of negative news about the nobles, as the elites of this society, they still had many redeeming qualities. Usually, the nobles might only know how to enjoy life, but in the face of the pressure of survival, many of them would show a side that was completely different from usual. Baron Roddy, my private army can be split up and mixed into your army. If there's a battle, I will fight alongside them. I don't have many people left, but if there's really a battle, I can still go to the battlefield. If there's a need, just add me into the team at any time. Roddy's face was actually very pale. He originally had some hope for the nobles of the kingdom, but Sienna's behavior had completely disappointed him. Because the Milner family was backed by the royal family, everything that was happening right now was probably, or should I say, basically the royal family's doing. He had worked hard for 2 years just to protect this country when the flames of war came, but when the orcs really came, the nobles and the royal family gave him a big surprise package. Roddy felt a little depressed, as if his blood had been spilled on the ground. However, the few nobles in front of him made him feel a lot better. At least their existence proved that this country was not completely rotten. My lords, barons, and viscounts, it's still not certain that we'll go to the battlefield. If the orcs don't come after us, maybe we can directly reach the nearest fortress tomorrow. Now, what you need to do is to try your best to preserve your strength, adjust your state, and don't fall behind. In fact, the team was now indeed facing the dilemma of physical exhaustion. More and more soldiers had already slowed down. If Roddy had not slowed down because there were no orcs coming after them, he was afraid that many of them would have fallen behind by now. At this time, the team had been moving in the forest for an hour. The information from Natha's aerial reconnaissance showed that the orcs were still outside Picaro City. After confirming that the situation was safe, Roddy finally gave the order to stop and rest for 20 minutes by a river. Try to feed the horses as much as possible. When we go to the stream to fetch water, we must be escorted by the cavalry. There are not only orcs in the forest. I don't want to see any unlucky people die from poisonous snakes or magical beasts. Yes, Commander. Erwin, take a few people with you and gather food nearby. Try to let the soldiers replenish their strength. Yes, boss. The team was very quiet at this time, because everyone was so tired that they could not speak. Roddy walked around and roughly calculated the current situation. At the same time, he met Catherine, who was helping to bandage the wounds of the wounded. The latter was almost the opposite of yesterday when she was dressed in a long dress. She had tied up her long hair, and her hunting clothes were all kinds of blood and mud, but she did not seem to care. When she saw Roddy coming over, she very respectfully got up and bowed, and said in a low voice, "Thank you, Baron Roddy. I apologize for my arrogance and rudeness yesterday." Her words were extremely sincere, as if she had changed into a different person. But Roddy was not too surprised. In the face of war, anyone would make changes. Some people were fragile and collapsed, and some people would also become stronger. At this time, Catherine was more like a head nurse. She took the initiative to follow Akasha to help treat the wounded. Until now, she was also very tired, but the firmness in her eyes was far more than before. Roddy did not say much. Nobles like her could be found everywhere. After experiencing the cruelty of reality, the cohesion of the whole team was extremely high. In fact, this team was now a soldier in mourning. When continuing to walk in the team, Roddy inevitably met Naife. He sighed with mixed feelings, but he did not dare to go forward to talk to her. Now, Roddy knew that his silence towards Naife was in itself a kind of mistake. To put it bluntly, his depression and puzzlement could be attributed to the 4 words, "Too much is as bad as not enough." He cherished the loss in the past, but when cherishing went too far, it would become an unspeakable burden, which made both sides somewhat breathless. His excessive love for Naife was actually a sign that he had lost his mind. Realizing this, Roddy was very regretful. But if he could go back to the day when he reunited with Naife, he would still choose to love her like this. After all, people could not be rational all their lives. Naife would always be a knot in Roddy's heart. This could not be changed. Feelings could never be analyzed as data. In the distance, Naife seemed to have noticed his gaze. Her hand gesture stopped for a moment. The simple, moving magic failed because she was distracted. When she turned around, she saw Roddy's apologetic face. What is he going to say? Is he not angry anymore? Will he still treat me like before? Naife felt that her heart was beating very fast. She was usually mischievous, but at this moment her mouth was dry and she could not say a word. And Roddy did not hesitate for too long. He simply walked over and whispered, "Naife, I shouldn't have treated you like that. I was too selfish." Selfish, yes, I have always regarded Naife as an object that needs to be protected, but I did not treat her as an independent person. This is naked selfishness. No. It's okay, I was too. But before Naife could finish her words, Erwin suddenly shouted from afar, "Something is wrong with him. Don't go there. Stay away from him." The calm atmosphere was instantly broken. The soldiers in the periphery stood up vigilantly, drew out their swords and formed a formation. Sodeler led the temporary mobile team to the place where the shout came from. Roddy glanced at Naife. The latter knew that Roddy also wanted to go, so she did not say anything more. She directly said, "Brother Roddy, be careful." Roddy nodded, then immediately activated Sprint and ran into the distance. Naife, who stayed in the same place, took a deep breath. It seemed that a big knot in her heart had been untied because she could call out "Brother Roddy" again, but the problem in front of Roddy made him unable to relax. When he rushed to about 100 meters away from the periphery of the team, he saw the scene of Erwin using a tomahawk to push away a private soldier. Why did the private soldier attack Erwin? Roddy was puzzled, but then he noticed that the movement of the private soldier was very stiff. The way he walked and the way he attacked were different from ordinary people. Coupled with his pale cheeks, a term immediately came to Roddy's mind: undead. Erwin had never seen an undead before. He only sensed that something was wrong with the enemy based on the instinct of the barbarian. So in the face of the enemy's attack, he easily used the advantage of his height and arm length to block the enemy 2 meters in front of him. And when Roddy saw this scene, he did not hesitate and directly gestured to Sodeler, who immediately rushed over on his horse. Puff! The head of the undead was directly cut off, but the blood did not splatter everywhere like a living person. Instead, it slowly flowed out after the body fell to the ground. "Don't come close. Be careful of the corpse poison." Roddy looked around and quickly ordered, "Increase the vigilance, let Sally and Akasha purify the water." After saying that, he raised his hand and changed the title of The Last Witcher to Slayer of the Undead, and then carefully examined the body. "Thank you for your support, gluttonous, careful, sunny little Mia. Chapter 489. When Roddy inhaled, he could smell the strong smell of blood, which proved that it was not too long between the death and the transformation of the undead, and the private soldier decoration on the body proved this. It was a soldier who had just been attacked by the orcs. The headless body was motionless, but if you looked closely, you could see the huge wounds on its body caused by the wolf riders. "Boss, isn't this guy human?" "Dead, living dead. Next time you see it, just kill it. Be careful not to let its blood splash into your mouth and eyes. If this happens, immediately go to Akasha and purify it with divine power, otherwise you will soon be poisoned to death, understand?" The big man Erwin hurriedly nodded, at the same time checking his body for the undead's blood. And Roddy slowly stood up, his eyes extremely solemn as he looked around. What did it mean for the undead to appear here? While he was thinking, he noticed the notification in the quest panel. Clicking on it, he was surprised to find a clue for the next step in Judgment of the Bone Throne: the undead soldiers have appeared in front of you, which indicates the conspiracy of Augustine the Great. You are facing the threat of the greatest monarch of the Bone Throne. Fight. Otherwise, you will become one of the many white bones. Quest objective: repel the undead army. January 30. Kill the leader of the undead army. 0/1 quest time. 3 days quest reward. 672,0000 EXP, 2 advanced talent points, choose 3 skills to strengthen. The lines of words made Roddy gulp. For an epic quest to reach this step, the reward was indeed tempting. But such a reward was accompanied by unimaginable danger. The 3-day quest time and the undead army of 3,000 were placed together, indicating that he was probably facing a premeditated encirclement of the undead. This was really a double whammy. The threat of the orcs was right in front of him, but the undead actually quietly laid such a big trap? How did he do it? Rhodey was lost in thought as he looked at the corpses in front of him. Suddenly, he heard the warning of the soldiers nearby. He quickly got up and found that Sodeler had already led 3 cavalrymen to kill a few figures that were about to pounce on the troop. An undead. Return to the squad immediately. It's not safe here. Roddy did not waste any time. He called Erwin and the others and left. When he returned to the camp, Sodeler had already killed 8 undead. At the same time, the alarm indicated that more enemies were approaching. Stop resting. Everyone, prepare to depart. The soldiers who had just taken a breather immediately picked up their weapons and began to line up. The exhausted nobles endured the pain in their legs and got up. But just as Sally was about to lead the troops eastward, Roddy suddenly called out to her. Wait. Sodeler had just returned to the team at this time and said anxiously, although there aren't many undead in the periphery, these people are dressed like private soldiers, and one of them should be a baron. They're all participating in the hunt. This is not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence at all, Roddy muttered to himself and suddenly said, we can't continue. If we do, we'll die. His words were almost alarmist, and the surrounding nobles immediately looked over. After the previous incident, no one had any doubts about Roddy now. They were just very puzzled as to why Roddy would make such a judgment. The orcs haven't caught up yet. These undead soldiers can even defeat ordinary soldiers. We can still break out of the encirclement. Yes, continue. We can definitely do it. No. Why did we encounter the undead right after we got rid of the orcs? Sienna, that traitor, can only collude with the orcs, but can't he also call the undead? Damn it. There was no need for Roddy to say anything. The nobles immediately realized what was going on. None of them were fools, and almost immediately they had a rough idea of what had happened. But the more they did so, the more silent the atmosphere became. The sirens on the periphery were incessant, indicating that more and more undead were surging here. The nearest village can't be reached before nightfall. If it's dark, then the undead will have the advantage, because these summoned zombies don't rely on their eyes to identify their target. It doesn't matter whether it's day or night. By then, even if the wolf riders don't catch up to our team, I'm afraid we'll be surrounded by the undead. Roddy could be sure of this, because he was very familiar with the necromancer's style of battle. To put it bluntly, when there was a sufficient number of soldiers, they only needed to rely on encirclement and attrition to exhaust the stamina of the soldiers. There was no need to charge, no need to use tricks. The undead style of battle was to overwhelm their target with absolute numbers advantage. They didn't care how many people died or how much morale fell. In terms of the mission objective, there were at least 3,000 soldiers surrounding Roddy. This number was enough to completely destroy Roddy's slow-moving team. Even if they reached the nearest village and resupplied, without the protection of the city walls, they wouldn't be able to stop a single village. What if the orcs didn't catch up? What if there weren't so many undead? Although there were countless what-ifs, everyone present understood that if their fate was entrusted to what-ifs, then their chances of survival would probably be 1 in 10,000. There was no such thing as luck in war. One wrong step could result in everyone paying the price with their lives. Now that the team had fallen into a complete deadlock, no matter which option they chose, it was nothing more than a fight to the death. In terms of probability, the outcome was almost death. It was just that they didn't have the courage to get rid of the burden and break out of the encirclement. If you can't, then so be it. Those who are willing to stay, stay. Sally, Duke, Baron Roddy and the rest of you split into a small team. The chances of escaping danger will definitely be higher. Some nobles calmly proposed this method. Although it was very cruel, at this moment, no one raised any objections. The older nobles didn't say anything else and began to organize their leather armor and weapons. Although many of them had been afraid of death for many years, they were really willing to sacrifice themselves now. In the first creed of human nobles, dying in battle was always glorious. Catherine's eyes dimmed. She understood that if they really carried out this plan, she would undoubtedly be the one to be sacrificed. But now that things had come to this, she calmly accepted this fate. At least, compared to before, Catherine believed that she had finally thought things through a lot. This was the only solution left. Sally looked at Roddy with a complicated gaze. The latter frowned and tried hard to think of a solution. But no matter what, Roddy couldn't find a way to protect the team. You have to bear the consequences of your own actions. Looking at the somewhat solemn team, Catherine suddenly sighed with emotion. If we didn't insist on forming an alliance to deal with Sally and Duke over the mine, I'm afraid we wouldn't be in this situation now. Several nobles who had been in the same team as Viscount Henri looked ashamed. But now that things had come to this, there was no point in regretting. The mine? Roddy suddenly raised his head and stared at Catherine. You said the mine? The mine in the Cohen Mountains? Why, yes. Catherine didn't understand why Roddy was so agitated all of a sudden. She instinctively replied, but then she saw him take a deep breath. Phew, there's still hope. What do you mean? Roddy, what's wrong with the mine? Sally didn't understand. She had bid for the 2 silver mines last night because she had listened to Roddy's advice, but she didn't know the reason behind it. But now, why did the escape have anything to do with the mine? Roddy glanced at the map bar and confirmed the plan. He shouted, "Turn around immediately and head for the Cohen Mountains. It's not far from here. If we continue walking, it's less than 12 kilometers away." But are the undead afraid to go up the mountain? Stop guessing. I'll explain it to you when we get there. Roddy quickly ran to the troops that were on standby and shouted, "Guards, protect us on both sides. Only attack the undead that are close to us. Don't worry about the rest. Everyone, continue walking. These scumbags don't understand our kingdom at all. There's a way to deal with them in the Cohen Mountains." Roddy's voice made the soldiers and nobles feel a little more confident. He didn't look like he was forcing a smile. Instead, he was very confident. Those who should ride, ride. Don't save your energy for the war horses. Let's go up the mountain. Turning around, Roddy pointed at Catherine and the barons who volunteered to cover the retreat. Don't even think about dying. Listen to me. This time, I guarantee that you will survive. Everyone will be the heroes of the kingdom. The enemies will die under our swords. Soldiers, move out. For the kingdom of Karen. Catherine's eyes widened. She looked at the people who gritted their teeth and stood up for survival, for the kingdom, and for glory. Suddenly, she felt a surge of hot blood in her chest. For the kingdom of Karen. Her voice was mixed with the shouts of the soldiers. Whether it was her, the private soldiers, the Holy War Army, the Dragon Spear Knights, or the nobles, at this moment, everyone had only one identity. They were the first army in the kingdom to launch a counterattack in decades. At the same time, Goddard's troops were camping and resting 300 meters outside of Picaro City. To the humans in the city, this kind of contemptuous behavior was definitely a silent insult. Not only that, every once in a while, the wolf riders would carry the severed limbs that they had just chopped off and approach the city. They would throw the limbs near the city walls to intimidate the nervous soldiers on the city walls. After throwing the limbs for an hour, many guards who had never been on the battlefield were pale and weak in the knees. Because the ground was densely packed with human body parts, it was too terrifying. But Goddard's mood didn't improve because of this. He had lost more than 70 soldiers, but because the enemy was holed up in the city, he couldn't take revenge. Now, he had no choice but to vent his anger in this way. After his anger gradually dissipated, he simply began to worry about returning to the grassland. Anyway, he had killed enough people and earned enough nobles' heads. This trip was not a loss no matter what. But just as he was about to order everyone to rest on the spot, the orc in a black robe appeared in front of him again and brought him a surprising news. "You said they didn't enter the city? How is that possible?" Chidien was banned, and I didn't receive any notice before this, so I didn't have any articles to post. The editor said that the amount of my updates could be ranked in the top 3 of the least banned updates. In order not to be included in this list, I worked hard to update 2 times today. Chapter 490. As the sun gradually set in the west and the temperature began to drop, Roddy's team finally broke through the resistance of the undead and arrived at the foot of the Cohen Mountains. They began to climb up without stopping. There were some man-made marks at the foot of the mountain, obviously left by the mining team. However, there were only a few overseers left in the camp. They stared at the team in confusion, but before they could say anything, they were dragged to the side by a few burly barbarian soldiers. The food and water in the camp were immediately requisitioned, and were distributed to everyone in the blink of an eye. "Who are you?" "This is Viscount Enru." He shut his mouth before he could finish his sentence because the nobles around him were glaring daggers at him. Enru and Sienna had long been labeled as the top traitors by these nobles, so it was only natural that his subordinates would be labeled with the same label. If they could, they would cut them into 1,000 pieces. At this time, the needle-tailed sand cone appeared in their field of vision again. The news that Nada brought to them made them even more nervous. The orcs had left the city of Picaro. They had gathered more than 400 orcs and were rushing towards the Cohen Mountains. Judging by the time, they should be here in an hour and a half. That's enough. Roddy nodded expressionlessly. The undead are also gathering here. Because there is no organized team, I can't tell when they will arrive. That's not important. Take the Kelda duck and rest for a while. Later, keep an eye on the area. Roddy did not stop walking. He waved his hand and continued to give orders. Everyone, move forward. Bring as much food and water as you can. Now. The team continued up the mountain. This time, it was Roddy who led the team. He moved with ease. Because the mine had just been excavated, many of the paths were just small, winding paths. However, Roddy ignored these paths and led the team on another path. They arrived at a mine halfway up the mountain at an even faster speed. This was one of the few fused silver mines that Viscount Enru had mined. According to the data displayed at the auction last night, this mine was the one that produced the most fused silver in the entire mountain range. However, the place was not bustling with activity at the moment. Instead, Viscount Enru's team of investigators were busy working inside and outside the mine. "Where are the miners here?" When Sally asked this question, the members of the investigation team looked at each other. They had no idea why Lord Aferta would appear here, so none of them said anything. Sodeler didn't waste any more time. He used a few methods to make them spill the beans. "Duke, Lord Duke, we don't know where they went. Last night there were more than 300 people working normally, but today all of them disappeared. There are no traces at the scene, only footprints on the ground. It seems like someone was dragged into the mine." Roddy was originally looking down at the edge of the mine, but he was relieved when he heard this. However, the others were puzzled and did not know what this meant. "Bring all the food here. Take as many as you have and leave this place in 5 minutes. Leave." Sally looked around. This place had a high vantage point and was protected by the wooden fence of the temporary camp. No matter what, it was the best place to defend and counterattack. "Yes, we'll leave immediately." Roddy was not in the mood to explain to the others, but he told Sally, "Don't think that this place is safe. On the contrary, this is the most dangerous place." After a few steps, Akasha came over. Roddy looked at her inquisitively. "We're here?" The latter nodded tacitly. This exchange was very short, and no one understood the meaning behind it. At this time, no one in the team would doubt him. They quickly picked up the pickaxes and began to climb up according to the route Roddy had pointed out. There were not many people in the team to take care of the logistics. Because of the sudden incident, they did not have any supplies at all. Fortunately, the food they had plundered from the camp was enough for 400 people to eat a meal. Otherwise, not to mention battle tomorrow, it would be a different matter if they could even stand up. The afterglow of the sun dyed the clouds in the sky golden red, but no one sighed at the beautiful scenery. All of them gritted their teeth and climbed up. The Cohen Mountains were flat, and the description of steep peaks did not apply here. It was precisely because of this that the team could move forward with their horses. After leaving the mine halfway up the mountain, the vegetation on the mountain became sparse. Because of the cold weather this year, there were only some weeds that had just sprouted, and there were not many trees at the top. And after walking for another 300 meters, the people suddenly found a huge rock platform above the mine. Although it was covered with weeds, anyone with a bit of insight could see that the terrain was not ordinary. It was not large, only 200 meters square, but if they wanted to go up it, they had to go through a 30-meter-long slope. In other words, if they were to defend on the slope, the difference in strength between the two sides would be completely eliminated in this part of the area that was only about 7 meters wide. The appearance of such a treasure land made the nobles feel lucky. But when they looked at Roddy, they found that there was no surprise on his face at all, as if he was just revisiting an old place. "Soddler, move everyone up. Irwin, bring a few men to chop some trees over there, about 3 meters will do. I want 20. Those with pickaxes, stay behind and dig the trenches. Dig as deep as you can." On the narrow mountain road, the troops began to be divided. Fortunately, Soddler was born to be a commander, and the troops that were divided by him quickly lined up in an orderly manner. 400 people was actually not a lot, but it was because of the presence of 200 horses that it was a little messy. After quickly moving up the platform, the nobles' private troops began to help with food preparation and building a defensive line. The Bishop of Rose Cross, Sally, and Akasha arranged the 70 wounded in the central area. At the same time, Roddy led his men to erect walls and clear the field, blocking the only way up to the platform with a trench, to prevent a direct attack from the wolf riders. "They're here." As the troops were methodically preparing for battle, a baron who looked up at the foot of the mountain suddenly said. Everyone looked up. In the afterglow of the setting sun, the orc wolf riders had already entered the foot of the Cohen Mountains from the edge of the Da Vinci forest. At this moment, if Roddy's troops could see them, they would naturally also notice them. After confirming this, the wolf riders no longer squeezed the energy out of their mount. They turned around and jumped down from their mounts, and began to slowly advance up the mountain. In Goddard's eyes, these humans were already in the bag. And further away, one after another, swaying figures were advancing towards the foot of the mountain. These zombies were considered to be the lowest combat units among the undead. However, what made them powerful was not their attack power, but the corpse poison they carried. If the poison was not purified in time, the person bitten would basically die in less than 2 hours. These zombies were not a threat, but when they appeared in hundreds or thousands, it was enough to be a great threat. "Roddy, can we really make it?" Sally's face was full of exhaustion. She was exhausted after a whole day of running. At this moment, she did not care about the gazes of the surrounding nobles. She reached out and held Roddy's hand, looking at the foot of the mountain in a daze. 400 wolf riders, thousands of undead. I really did not expect to be surrounded by them in the kingdom. There are many enemies, and they are very strong, but they are not invincible. Roddy knew that Sally was not confident, so he opened his arms and gently hugged her. He softly said, "Not only can we make it, but we will also counterattack and completely destroy them." Sally only took it as consolation. She nodded, closed her eyes, and sighed in his arms. At this moment, the nobles had already forgotten to be surprised by the relationship between Roddy and Sally. They only stared blankly at the enemy that was several times their size, their hearts beating nervously as they waited for the next fate. It's getting dark. Roddy hugged Sally, looking down at the distant Picaro city. The afterglow of the setting sun dyed the city that was supposed to protect them red. From afar, it seemed as if the earth was smeared with blood. 20 minutes later, the first wave of the orcs' attack came as scheduled. Fortunately, Roddy did not abandon his armor in order to speed up along the way. At this moment, the barbarian soldiers were still fully equipped. They held fine steel tower shields and stood in 3 rows on the slope that was 7 meters wide. Behind them were the 2nd and 3rd reserve troops, and further back were the other soldiers who were taking the time to rest and replenish their food. Although the nobles were not arranged to go into battle, they were also fully armed as the last batch of reserve troops. Even Catherine was equipped with a short sword. Although she knew that it might not be of much use, she did not mind fighting to the death when she was really at the end of the line. Hold the attack. When the sky is completely dark, they will no longer be a threat. Roddy stood on the saddle of the Train King and looked down at the more than 100 orcs running in front of him like a mobile turret. He raised the horn bow in his hand slightly, but his gaze made brief contact with the strong orc warlord in the distance. It's actually Goddard. His pupils shrank, and he was extremely surprised. The name, Goddard, was not a small character in his memory. He was the #1 general under the King of Axes, Sauron. His strength was outstanding, but he was conceited and arrogant. He was a ruthless character that was extremely difficult to control. Logically speaking, he should only have appeared in the war in 593. Why did he bring so many orcs to charge into the kingdom now? Before the doubts in his heart could be answered, the orcs in front of him were already within a range of 60 meters. Roddy did not think anymore. The arrow that had long been knocked in his hand shot out. Crush them. Kill all of them. The Sarota tribe will win. Even though more than 10 people had fallen on the way, this group of high-spirited fellows still rushed up the long slope. They roared as they crossed the trench, and with simple weapons in hand, they pounced on the first row of barbarian soldiers. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Thanks for the monthly votes. Sword Emperor Lionhaken, Book Friend 141007122037860, Gale Knight, Maple Chess, Eva Temple, Book Friend 11 asterisk 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 asterisk, Dante Lewis. Thanks for the votes. Reinforced Bartray, Skullhead, Man Who Loves Salad, Nice Little Tutor. Chapter 491. Hold on. Sodeler's voice was almost instantly drowned out by the roars of the orcs. Although there were only 30 to 40 people in the first row, the wild impact still made the nobles at the back hear muffled roars like thunder. The front line was squeezed and deformed. This was the first time the barbarian soldiers had encountered these stronger opponents. They all raised their shields with serious expressions and used all their strength to resist the guys in front of them. Blessing of power! Shield strike! Boom! The neat formation of infantry collectively used this tactic to force the enemy back, but this time the enemy was not knocked back. Instead, they staggered for half a step and pounced again. The orcs had strong bodies and extremely strong resistance. Unless they were critically injured by a longsword, they would always be as tough as a beast. If not for the barbarian soldiers' excellent equipment, perhaps more than half of the soldiers in the first row would have fallen by now. However, it was these pieces of equipment that were truly useful. Although the orcs' attack was fierce, it was quite a 3 axes style. After the first 3 attacks were unable to break the situation, the compression of the entire front immediately began to slow down. This was mainly because the wolf riders were not good at fighting on foot, or in other words, they did not know how to fight at all. They fought completely based on instinct. Whether it was a battle between tribes or a duel between braves, there was no such thing as formation or cooperation. Except for Sauron's specially trained troops, all the other orcs were like this. This also caused the orcs' attack to immediately slow down after 3 minutes. Once they lost their momentum, they were completely suppressed at the bottom of the slope. The advantage of being higher up was definitely not a joke. The barbarian soldiers were originally about the same height as the orcs, and when they were in a position where they were uphill, every time they pushed and collided, the orcs had to use 30 to 40% more strength to deal with it. The orcs could withstand 1 or 2 attacks, but after 8 or 10 attacks, their physical strength quickly reached the limit. Ding! Clang! The sounds of weapons colliding with armor could be heard everywhere. The beastmen worshipped 1 man can defeat 10 men, and strength was everything. However, they did not know that when inferior weapons collided with superior armor, it would be very difficult to cause any additional damage other than the shock. The nobles' private soldiers they had attacked before were basically all wearing leather armor, which was no different from paper in the face of the wolf's charge. However, the barbarian soldiers were wearing fine iron heavy armor, which was made of thick material that ordinary people would not be able to wear. In addition, this was a face-to-face battle. The orcs' attack power was greatly reduced without the Mount Wolf's support. Faced with the tower shield's defense, they felt completely helpless. After 3 to 4 minutes of frenzied attacks, only 3 of the barbarian soldiers in the front row had been dragged to the back due to injuries. Meanwhile, the second row of barbarian soldiers had easily blocked the barbarian soldiers outside. The city wall formed by the 15 tower shields was indestructible. Although the orcs had a large number of people, they were unable to deploy more troops on the narrow ramp. This kind of adding fuel to the fire tactic, which was the most taboo for military strategists, forced Roddy to stand on the side of the advantage. The short swords of the barbarian soldiers mercilessly slashed at the orcs. When the wolf riders lost the support of the Mount Wolves, they completely became a group of scattered soldiers. Facing the united defense formation, the first batch of orcs could only drag a group of wounded soldiers and retreat in humiliation after leaving behind 23 corpses. Did you see that? The enemy is nothing to be afraid of. Roddy knew that he had to maintain morale at this time. Otherwise, he would not be able to control the fact that the orcs would collapse without a fight. Following his words, the soldiers responded with shouts. Then, they chopped off the heads of the dead orcs and neatly placed them in front of the trench. The nobles who had been looking terrible also let out a long sigh of relief. They excitedly raised their swords and cheered. Their originally hopeless mood immediately turned for the better. However, the orcs in the distance could not tolerate such provocation. When someone asked Goddard for permission to launch a second wave of attack, the warlord stretched out his hand and stopped them. He turned to look at the human camp, which was ready for battle, and waved his hand. He actually led everyone to retreat. The orc soldiers were very confused and protested, but Goddard was unmoved. He led the large army directly to the camp in front of the mine 300 meters away and ordered them to set up camp. It was also at this moment that the sun completely sank into the horizon. The surrounding scenery turned from warm to cold, and then completely dark. The orcs, who were still indignant, finally realized the warlord's intentions. They calmed down and stopped making a ruckus. Occasionally, someone would curse softly, but then they obediently lit a bonfire and went to prepare food for the wargs. Don't go looking for trouble at night. They won't be able to escape. Even if we don't attack, they will rush out of hunger after surrounding us for 3 days. Do you understand? Goddard was not a simple-minded fool. The area that the other party was stationed in was only so big. There was no food or water in this kind of place. How long could more than 400 people last without food and water? If he couldn't forcefully attack, he had to take the initiative. With night blindness at a disadvantage, he would not be stupid enough to ask for trouble. Although that place was excellent for defense, it essentially cut off his escape route. From a military point of view, Roddy had set up a dead end for himself. I thought they would have some solutions. I didn't expect them to be so stupid as to defend to the death. Goddard also didn't expect things to develop to this stage. However, he dealt with every move and still held the initiative. Increase the number of patrols at night by 3 times. Be careful of them breaking out of the encirclement at any time. Make arrangements here. If these humans have any guts, send them to their deaths quickly. Yes, Warlord. However, just as these orders were issued, the black-robed orc appeared in front of him like a ghost again. Warlord, it seems like you've encountered some trouble? It's not troublesome. It just takes some effort. Although they were cooperating, Goddard had always disliked this sinister fellow. He waved his hand. These fellows will die sooner or later. There's no need for you to worry. Of course, your plan is very reasonable. However, I can slightly assist you. For example, let those humans spend this night happily. Goddard frowned. He had long noticed the hundreds and thousands of undead approaching the foot of the mountain. The other party's summoning technique was indeed terrifying. He didn't wish to have a conflict with the other party. After pondering for a moment, he simply agreed. As long as you don't interfere with my soldiers, you can do whatever you want. No problem. The black-robed orc's face stiffened and twitched a few times in the shadows. Goddard didn't want to look at that creepy smile, so he simply turned his head and stared at the bonfire. The other party didn't waste any more time and quietly left. 10 minutes later, the battle cries rang out from the human camp not far away. Some orcs looked up but were reprimanded by Goddard. What are you looking at? You can't even see the other party clearly when it's right in front of you. What can you see from so far away? Those who need to rest, rest. Those who need to patrol, patrol. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Conserve your energy. Those who need to sleep, sleep. Don't worry about anything else. 200 meters away, Roddy said similar words at the same time. His calm tone didn't make people feel that the situation was critical at all. However, in fact, the zombies surrounding the slope outside were already densely packed and blocked the slope outside for dozens of meters. The smell of rotting flesh and fresh blood in the air was nauseating. The soldiers of Rose Cross had a firm belief. Facing these undead creatures, there was only anger and no fear. However, the faces of the nobles and private soldiers were pale. The undead in front of them were basically the private soldiers of other nobles. Some of the nobles could even be seen. The barbarian soldiers in the front row attacked the zombies in unison. However, the zombies didn't dodge or evade. Sometimes, they even opened their mouths to bite the tower shields. In the face of such an attack that didn't require any technique, the soldiers naturally didn't hold back. The rotating teams continuously cut down the zombies that approached them. If there were too many of them, they would take a step back and use the collective shield attack to repel the enemies. This defense had been going on for more than 10 minutes. The barbarian soldiers' stamina was constantly being depleted. Although the intensity of the battle wasn't high, if this continued, they would eventually collapse on the front line due to exhaustion. Of course, Roddy wouldn't just sit back and watch. After lighting some temporary torches, he ordered, "Let those who haven't fought in battles go to the front line to assist in the battle. Let them familiarize themselves with dealing with the undead as soon as possible." He turned around and shouted, "These guys aren't much stronger than the wooden targets on the training ground. As long as you can cut down the scarecrows, you can cut down these zombies. Do you understand? Don't be afraid of being bitten. We have a bishop and 3 priests in our team. They're all excellent priests who have experienced the holy war. No one will die. Remember, we won't die here." Morale must be constantly encouraged by this method. Rhodey's face was full of confidence. However, when he stood at the front of the platform and saw the increasing number of the undead, his heart was stretched taut. If we continue to rotate like this, we might be able to hold on until the sun rises tomorrow. But if the enemy keeps pressuring us, I'm afraid we'll be in danger. Sodeler was also worried. He knew that the biggest problem now wasn't the enemy but their own supply. Don't worry about that. Rest when you need to. At dawn, we'll counterattack. Roddy reached out and took out a stack of scrolls from the storage box next to Train King. Luckily, I was prepared. Not long after, Holy Protection Barrier, Holy Light Burn, Gaze of the Gods, and other Aeoli spells were released along with the Golden Light. The screams of the undead creatures were incessant, and the offensive was slowed down for a while, allowing the soldiers to catch their breath. But not long after, the next batch of undead rushed over, trampling over the corpses on the ground. I don't have any more manuscripts. I'll write one chapter at a time. I'll try my best to write more over the next few days. Chapter 492. 300 meters away, the orc camp in front of the mine was bustling with activity. The wolf riders who were scattered in the forest had all arrived before dark. Only about 500 of the original 600 were left. Most of the casualties were caused by the counterattack led by Roddy's team. This made the orcs gnash their teeth in anger at the human team not far away. Every one of them shouted that they would avenge their comrades when the sun rose. However, compared to his excited subordinates, Warlord Goddard just stared blankly at the huge mine in front of him. He sighed in his heart. Before entering the kingdom of Karen, the orcs had never thought of themselves as poor. However, after entering the human world, they realized that they were worse than beggars. Apart from their military strength, the orcs were practically useless in other aspects. There were probably only 5 iron mines in the entire orc kingdom, and all of them were of extremely poor quality. In terms of value, they might not even be as valuable as the mines in the Cohen Mountains. Goddard looked at the pieces of thorium that his subordinates had found in the mine. Although he did not know how to use this material as an orc, plundering resources was definitely an instinct. Search the mine. Take as much of this ore as you can. Goddard did not want to be a warlord for the rest of his life. In the Orc Kingdom where military strength was king, mines were definitely precious resources. If he could get his hands on these ores, his army would be better armed and more powerful. When my army becomes stronger, Sauron will be nothing. He clenched his fists, and the idea that had been brewing in his heart grew stronger. On the other side, the black-robed orc with the staff in his hand looked ahead expressionlessly. He was almost numb as he organized batch after batch of zombies to rush up the slope. At this time, the trench dug by Roddy and the others had already been filled with corpses. There were too many zombies on the front line, and the soldiers had no choice but to push them down the cliff again and again. At this point, the undead attacking them were no longer the private armies of the nobles. Instead, most of them were farmers dressed in plain clothes. It was obvious that the villagers who were slaughtered by the beastmen had all become the undead mage's subordinates. The night breeze was abnormally cold, but the zombies were not affected at all. They kept charging forward, slowly wearing down the strength of the team in front of them. As a necromancer with powerful magical abilities, the black-robed orc had no intention of joining the battle himself. In his eyes, even if these stubborn humans fought with all their might, they would only be struggling at death's door until dawn. The Efta nobles have been cleaned up until now. You guys are the only ones left. What's the point of resisting now? Under the black hood, the orc's words were filled with undisguised arrogance and mockery. Ding! Roddy rubbed his hands together and opened the status bar according to the notification. As expected, a line of words appeared on it. Undead Slaughterer title had reached level 3. After looking up to make sure that the front line was stable, Roddy opened the description and carefully read the rewards after the upgrade. Speaking of which, he had long forgotten that the title could be upgraded, Undead Slaughterer could be upgraded. All this while, he had activated the title, The Last Witcher, in battle. It was only in the afternoon that he switched the title to deal with the undead. However, when a large number of undead were killed by the soldiers, Roddy realized that the title had started to upgrade continuously. When I first obtained this title, it came with 2 skills: Find Weakness, Undead, and Virus Resistance. It was indicated that the title could only be leveled up by killing this undead. As the battle continued, the title quickly leveled up after killing 100 and 300 undead, and I received 2 new skills: Frowny Face Tracking. Undead Level 1 Activate. Show undead within 200 meters on the map. Unable to show hidden target. Consumption, 10 stamina per minute. Disguise. Undead Level 1 Consumption, 50 stamina duration, 3 minutes use. Hide your presence, greatly reducing the probability of being discovered by the undead. Can be recognized by high-level undead. These skills were very targeted, but they were not of much use in the current battle. Because the enemies were surging in like the tide, whether it was tracking or disguise, it was meaningless. 8th Team. Come up. Yes. The Rose Cross Bishop's shout came from the front. The 15 noble private soldiers immediately rushed to the front from the rear, picked up their shields, and replenished the frontmost line. The barbarian soldiers who fought at the beginning were now sleeping soundly in the rear. Most of them were exhausted, and many were injured. But because of the divine purification, there were only those who fell from exhaustion from beginning to end, but no one died in battle. The situation of the nobles' private soldiers and the Rose Cross Holy War Army was much worse. Even with the bishop and the accompanying priests personally supervising the battle, more than 40 people had their necks bitten off and died on the front line. But as time passed, these soldiers gradually found the trick to deal with the zombies, and the casualty rate finally began to decrease. Even so, the situation of the battle was not optimistic. Even though the 10 teams had been taking turns to rest, their stamina gradually began to weaken. Under such circumstances, more troops should have been sent, but Roddy hid the most powerful dragon spear cavalry regiment. Sally, Akasha, Naife, and the others were also arranged to rest in the rear, obviously to accumulate strength. Commander, the soldiers are too tired. If we don't send more people, we really can't hold on. After midnight, the sweating bishop finally could not help but ask Roddy for help. The latter did not agree, but only let Erwin take the barbarian soldiers who had rested for 3 hours to join the battle. Although the front line was stabilized again, no matter how strong they were, the number of enemies never showed signs of reducing. More than 1,000 undead had died on the long slope, and the number at the back was endless at a glance. From the foot of the mountain to here, almost all the undead were dead. The soldiers in the front had no time to care about this, but the nobles at the back saw it clearly. Such a desperate situation made their hearts completely cold. But right at this moment, some strange noises came stealthily, ***************** bang. A sudden vibration came from the mine, causing Goddard, who was drowsy in front of the bonfire, to shiver. What's going on? He turned over and quickly picked up his battle-axe. The guards around also gathered around, looking at the place where the sound came from. But because there were no torches lit in the mine, they could only stare blankly since they were already night-blind. Goddard tried hard to calm himself down, and then realized that something might have happened to the team sent to the mine. He immediately said, "Greer, light a few more torches and call 7 people to investigate. Report immediately if there's anything." "Yes, Overseer." A team of orc soldiers immediately entered the mine with weapons in hand. But less than 3 minutes after entering, there was another vibration from inside. Bang! Compared to the previous sound, this time it was obviously much louder, and the distance was much closer. What's going on? Goddard could not understand what was happening in the mine, but his instincts made him grip his weapon tightly and say, "Everyone, hold your weapons." As soon as he finished speaking, a figure holding a torch appeared in the mine. The other party happened to be the team leader that Goddard had just sent out. At this moment, he was running with all his might. Although he was holding a torch in his hand, he flung it out with orange light. "Run! Run!" Before he could finish speaking, his body seemed to be hit by something. He spun around and fell to the ground, the torch in his hand landing 4 or 5 meters away with a thud. The next moment, the fire was extinguished with a "chee" sound, and all the sounds came to an abrupt end. Upon seeing this scene, no matter how foolish the orcs were, they would realize that there was probably something troublesome in the mine. The guards immediately surrounded Goddard, but the overseer didn't panic. Instead, he shouted, "Light the torches! Light all the torches!" Hiss! Before the orcs could move, a strange hiss suddenly appeared in front of them. Goddard only saw a blurry shadow flash by, and the subordinate standing at the front was sent flying with a scream. "Pada!" When his body landed on the ground, Goddard realized that his body had been split in half, and blood sprayed all over the ground. At the same time, several 2-meter-tall black shadows rushed over. They raised their scythe-like arms high up and instantly slashed at Goddard. Crack! A huge force came, and the battle axe that Goddard had raised to block was broken on the spot. However, he bent his body and dodged the opponent's second attack. Taking advantage of the enemy's exhaustion, the orc overseer did not retreat but advanced instead. He leaned his body forward, and with an angry roar, he slammed his shoulder into the enemy. Die! The orc's bravery was undoubtedly displayed here. The strength that was even more terrifying than the barbarian's frenzy sent the enemy flying. Amidst the sound of the armor cracking, Goddard punched through the enemy's abdomen. Pooh! Green blood splattered on Goddard's face. He took a closer look and found that this black fellow's head was like a pangolin's. Its upright body was covered in black armor, and its arms were actually 2 long claws that were more than a meter long. Looking at the orc that had been cut in half, he knew that the claws were unimaginably sharp. Seeing the enemy twitching and struggling, Goddard did not care if his palm would be cut. He pressed down on the enemy's claws and punched its head more than 10 times. He only stood up while panting heavily when the enemy's brain was smashed out. But then he realized that the situation had already gone out of control. The other orcs were not as strong as Goddard. Faced with dozens of monsters surging out of the mines, the night-blind orcs were cut down almost immediately. Even the patrol team that rushed over on their wolf mounts were easily cut down by the enemy's claws. "What the hell is this thing?" Goddard stared at the scene in front of him, completely dumbfounded. Monthly tickets thanks. Shuyu 23440-373, Dark Valley or Mirror, Forgotten Capital, Angel Howl, Dark Earth and Sky Mix, Purple Ice 1, Shuyu 150-328-094505-389, Kaffa Forest Odd Job Worker tickets thanks. Strengthened Bartray, Sunny Little Mia Mia. Chapter 493. The camp in front of the mine was in complete chaos. The torches around them could not provide any effective illumination. The night-blind orcs could only see some blurry shadows even if they tried their best to open their eyes. It was impossible to capture the enemy's movements. Therefore, they were no different from sandbags at the moment. They were basically being beaten up by these monsters. Goddard was not slow. He ordered his men to light as many torches as possible while he quickly took one in his hand to illuminate the area. Unexpectedly, the enemy rushed toward the torches and spat out a few puddles of liquid from their mouths, extinguishing most of the flames in the blink of an eye. This time, the Beastmen camp was completely plunged into darkness. One by one, the Beastmen with strong bodies were knocked to the ground as if they were blind. Miserable screams and muffled sounds of flesh and bone being separated mixed together, making this group of beastmen feel as if they were in hell. "Surround them! Gather the troops!" Goddard was completely helpless at the moment. He picked up a long sword and hurriedly joined the battle with a torch in his hand. However, the weapon in his hand was extremely useless against the enemy's carapace. In the end, he simply switched to a heavy mace and smashed the skulls of a few monsters with the cover of his men. However, his attack was simply a drop in the bucket. As new enemies continued to pour out of the mine, the number of these guys was probably over 100. Damn scum! Goddard cursed. But when he saw his soldiers being slaughtered, his heart was cold. Is my team going to die here? On the other side, the black-robed orc, who was originally commanding the undead attack, had just noticed the movement behind him. He heard the screams of the orcs, but because of the darkness in the distance, he could not see what exactly happened. He instinctively felt that something was wrong. He immediately ordered a team of 100 undead to follow him to the camp. Before they got close, 7 or 8 black shadows pounced on them, instantly setting off a bloody and fishy wind. The zombies were like vegetables in front of these monsters. With a swipe of their long claws, broken limbs flew into the sky. The black-robed orc's expression changed. He immediately released the light of the netherworld. A pale light bloomed in the sky, reflecting the tragic state of the orc camp in his eyes. When he saw the appearance of the monsters, the black-robed orc who had always been confident finally changed his expression. How is this possible? The sudden commotion on the ground caused the nobles to get up in a panic, but when they saw the chaos in the orc camp in the distance, they all realized that it was not a coincidence. What happened over there? Sally asked this question on behalf of everyone else. As the light of the netherworld bloomed, they saw the orc camp in chaos, but they could not identify what had caused this situation. Roddy's expression was no longer tense. He slowly exhaled and said something irrelevant. Yesterday, you must have wondered why I stopped you from buying this mine, right? What does this have to do with this? Sally looked into the distance in disbelief. As the second light of the netherworld lit up, the undead that had been piled up behind the ramp began to retreat in large numbers. This mine is not a treasure, but a hell. Roddy nodded, because there are at least 3 terror beast tribes inside the mountain. Terror beast? Is there really such a thing? The nobles cried out in surprise. Roddy looked into the distance, his face full of memories. As long as there is a Fuser silver mine, there will be terror beasts, and there may be more than 3,000 of them. And in the mine below us, it is estimated that there are at least 400 to 500 of them. His words made the nobles gasp. Most of them had only heard of the term Deinonychus in the stories of bards. This kind of creature would only occasionally be encountered by teams searching for treasures in the depths of the cave. They hid in the dark crevices of the rocks, waiting to attack the unprepared innocents. However, most of the bard stories relied on imagination and assumptions. The real terror beasts were far from what ordinary teams could deal with. They lived in groups, were bloodthirsty and belligerent. Once they found their prey, they would fight to the death. The only flaw was that they were afraid of sunlight and only dared to appear after midnight. However, if they moved in groups, all the creatures in their hunting range could only pray for their own good. So, Roddy already knew about it? Seeing Roddy nod, not only Sally, but also the nobles behind her felt a chill down their spines. Before this, they all thought that Viscount Unruh would definitely beat Sally into submission. Who would have thought that he already knew that this was a trap? He was just watching everyone jump into it. If this battle had not happened, Viscount Unruh wouldn't have been the only one who would have lost everything. The others would not have been spared. Thinking back to the news of more than 300 miners going missing, the nobles who were a little more quick-witted felt a chill run down their spines. The price of going against Roddy was not something an ordinary person could bear. Viscount Unruh wasn't the only one who had suffered. Now, the orcs and the undead had also fallen into his trap. Seeing these people standing there in silence, Roddy felt a little helpless. To put it bluntly, He had no other choice. He knew about terror beasts because of his memories from his previous life. In his previous life, the Fuser Silver Mine had a resounding name since the day it was mined: Silver Mine of Death. From a player's point of view, the entire Cohen Mountains was the dungeon area of the Silver Mine of Death. There were 7 or 8 dungeons ranging from level 10 to 25 in the mines within the mountains. Because the terror beasts would attack all living creatures inside and outside of the mines, there was only one camp in the entire mountain range that was safe, and that camp was right where Roddy was currently standing. In his memory, this platform had become the only quest distribution center in this dungeon area in year 593. With a deep trench dug, guards stationed there, and the help of mages, no matter how many terror beasts there was nothing they could do to this camp. So what do we do now? Will they come here? Kathleen looked into the distance. The screams of the orcs drifted over, causing her voice to tremble. They will, but don't worry about that. Roddy turned around and immediately ordered, all mages, get into position at the front line. If any terror beasts approach, release holy light continuously. Don't use other spells to attack. Soldiers in the front line, control the volume. Don't shout. Turning around, Roddy said to his subordinates who had rested for more than 6 hours, Dragon Spear Cavalry Regiment, prepare for battle. It's time to counterattack. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. It's actually the terror beasts. In the chaotic camp, the black-robed orc recognized these creatures at a glance. He cursed in a low voice, then weighed the pros and cons in his heart. From the perspective of the undead, he did not need to care about the lives of Goddard and the orcs. It did not matter even if they all died here. But from the strategic point of view of the Tasman Kingdom, Goddard had to survive. If he died here, then all the previous arrangements would be in vain. So he quickly made a decision, mobilized the zombies and turned to support the orcs. But as the zombies rushed into the camp, the orcs' chaotic situation did not improve. The number of terror beasts had already exceeded 150, and there seemed to be more of their kind rushing out of the mine. They killed everything that could move in front of them. The strong orcs could not stop them, not to mention the weak zombies. One terror beast could easily wipe out 10 zombies. Their carapaces were not afraid of being bitten, and the so-called corpse poison could not take effect in a short time. The zombies were torn apart by more and more terror beasts like shredded paper. The so-called support did not seem to be of any help at all. For the first time, anger appeared in the black-robed orc's eyes, but this emotion was fleeting. The next moment, he took out his white bone wand and quickly cast one necromancy spell after another. The light of the netherworld lit up the sky again, but it lasted much longer than before. With the help of the light, the orcs finally got rid of their night blindness and quickly moved in Goddard's direction to counterattack. As the incantation sounded, the black-robed orc raised his hand and tore the zombies nearby apart with a spell. He used piles of bones and limbs to form a bone wall that was more than 30 meters long and 4 meters high. An ordinary necromancer could not do this at all, but the black-robed orc did it twice in a row. He destroyed the bodies of more than 300 zombies and protected the orc army with bone walls on both sides. The terror beasts tried to break through the bone walls, but their strength was of no use other than breaking some bones. They had no choice but to take a detour. As a result, the orcs' pressure was greatly reduced, and they finally had the strength to regroup and counterattack. However, the undead army was also greatly weakened because of the 2 spells. The zombies that had just been replenished had all become raw materials. If he wanted to continue to break the siege, the necromancer had to mobilize more troops that were originally surrounding Roddy to support him. He looked back into the distance. The human troops on the platform were still desperately resisting the attack of the zombies. There was nothing unusual at all. At this time, reducing the pressure on the slope should not be a problem. The black-robed orc thought. He immediately raised his hand and released a bone spear spell at the charging terror beasts. The terror beasts fell to the ground after their throats were pierced. In less than 3 seconds, they stood up shakily and waved their giant claws at their own kind under the effect of necromancy control. As the black-robed orc chanted the incantation, the necromancy began to resurrect the terror-claw beasts that had died on the battlefield. With their addition, the heavily injured orcs finally regained their footing under the cover of the 2 bone walls. However, in just half an hour, the orcs suffered nearly 300 casualties. Now, under the protection of the bone walls, there were only about 120 orcs left who could still fight. The undead army was also seriously damaged. Except for the more than 200 zombies that were still blocking the human camp, less than half of the more than 1,000 zombies that were temporarily supporting the camp were now left, and they were quickly being killed by the remaining terror beasts. Monthly votes appreciated. Lucky Forever, Love Egg Yolk, Fiery Reader, Dark Side, Forgotten City, Book Friend 234400373, White in the End, It's Hard to Find a Good Name Z, Little Yang Chapter Name, a tribute to Death Gold Mine in World of Warcraft. He remembered when he went to the dungeon with a group of people in the internet cafe, walked through the winding mine tunnel, and saw the big ship that Van Cleef was on. It was really shocking. Chapter 494. After discovering that the orcs were protected by the bone wall, the terrorclaw beasts finally stopped wasting their energy. After more than 10 of them were killed or injured, they turned around and pounced towards the human camp in the distance. However, before they could defeat the zombies on the long slope, a dazzling golden light made them turn around and flee. Compared to the light of the netherworld, the holy light spell of the clergy was obviously more lethal to the nocturnal creatures. Under the command of Roddy, the human team effortlessly avoided the attacks of the terrorclaw beasts. Such a scene made Goddard and the black-robed orc realize that they had been ruthlessly tricked. The terrorclaw beasts only began to return an hour after the attack. At this time, waves after waves of white-haired monkey-like creatures rushed out. They moved the corpses and flesh on the ground back into the cave, as if they were cleaning up the battlefield. These were the ghost beasts that accompanied the terrorclaw beasts. They would collect food for the terrorclaw beasts and at the same time, consciously clean up the scene to lure the next wave of victims. It was also because of the existence of these creatures that the team that came to investigate the mine previously could not find where the missing miners went. Goddard also did not notice the abnormality of the mine. The appearance of the ghost beasts meant that the attack of the terrorclaw beasts was about to retreat. The black-robed orc secretly let out a sigh of relief. However, just as the last batch of terrorclaw beasts ran past the bone wall, there was suddenly a loud noise from afar. Boom! An orange flame shot into the sky from the long slope in front of the human camp. Just the shockwave alone blew more than 40 zombies off the cliff. The undead in the center of the explosion almost directly disappeared in the high temperature. After the heat wave passed, a vacuum area suddenly appeared on the long slope. The flame blast that Naife cast through the scroll shook off a lot of rocks from the side of the mountain. Even Goddard could clearly feel the violent tremor. "Good job!" Roddy loudly encouraged her and then pulled her to the back. 2 small teams then rushed out from the platform. The team in front quickly cleaned up the remaining zombies, while more than 20 people carried tree trunks and built a small bridge over the trench. Immediately after, the sound of a horn accompanied by the holy light spell pierced through the pitch-black night sky. A team of 100 neatly dressed cavalrymen charged straight for the orc camp. "Damn it! Warlord Goddard, have your troops prepare for attack. The human cavalry is approaching." Due to night blindness, the beastman could not see far away. The black-robed beastman had no choice but to give a warning. At the same time, he tried to cast more bone walls to create obstacles. Now that things had come to this, he had no choice but to admit that the situation on the battlefield had been reversed. The undead and beastmen alliance that had been confident of victory was now passively facing the charge of the humans. You won't succeed. His eyes emitted rays of light, and he cast necromancy spells at an even faster speed. But if one looked carefully, they would discover that some cracks had already appeared on the black-robed beastman's arm. "Follow me." After carefully crossing the trench, Roddy immediately ordered the Train King to lower its head and accelerate. As it was going downhill, its cumbersome body did not take more than a few steps before it broke into a trot. Including its armor and load, the Fendi Elk, which had a mass of 5 tons, was practically a heavy tank. All the zombies in its way were easily crushed and sent flying. In less than 50 meters, its huge antlers were skewered with more than 10 half-dead undead. With a casual flick of its head, these burdens were all cleared away, and it continued to run forward, with the Train King opening the way. The cavalry formed by the Dragon Spear Knights and the Ducal Palace's private soldiers were no longer under any pressure. Sodeler, Sally, Akasha, Titus, Wellington, and the others were all at the front of the team. The Rose-Cross Bishop was at the back of the team, constantly casting holy light spells to illuminate the area. The rumbling of the horses' hooves on the ground grew louder and louder. After leaving the narrow slope, they spread out sideways and began to accelerate. The orcs were now right at the bottom of the terrain. Due to the attack just now, they were only left with more than 100 infantrymen. At this moment, no matter how one looked at it, they were at an absolute disadvantage. If not for the black-robed orc constantly summoning undead to block the front, the only thing Goddard could do right now was to escape. There are only 100 of them. If we can block the charge, we can get rid of these guys. Seeing the black-robed orc constantly casting spells, Goddard understood that he and the other party were in the same boat. He could only bite the bullet and give the order to face the attack. But just as he finished speaking, his vision turned completely white because of a white light. Divine purification. Banish evil. Holy light protection. Holy Nova. Rhodey had asked Akasha to make a total of 54 magic scrolls. At that time, other than the 38 scrolls that were used for defense, the remaining 16 scrolls were activated almost at the same time when the team approached the orcs' camp. The light of various divine spells made the whole sky as bright as day. The zombies, undead terrorclaws, and various bone walls in front of them were immediately affected by the divine spells. Most of them were emitting black smoke and had lost their fighting power. In the face of the swift and fierce cavalry, they were easily cut down like wooden stakes. The acid bog, bone wall, and corrosive poisonous fog that the black-robed orc had just cast were also purified by the divine spell. Although he was stronger than Akasha, the characteristic of the necromancy spell being countered by the divine spell made it difficult for him to resist all of this alone. There was no way he could stop all of this, so he could only watch as the cavalry charged into the formation, broke through the orcs' defense line, and tore the entire camp apart. For the kingdom of Karen. Kill all these scums. All the cavalrymen had a full meal before the sky turned dark and immediately rested. After resting for 7 hours, most of their physical strength had already recovered. They were all extremely excited at this moment because the suffocating feeling of being forced into a desperate situation could finally be vented. They were not besieged to death. Instead, they launched a righteous counterattack and really defeated the enemy. The black-robed orc who was hiding in the crowd had an extremely ugly look on his face. He knew that the battle in front of him was completely out of his control. But as the mastermind of the whole thing, he would never allow himself to fail like this. Rip. He tore open his black robe, revealing the original position of his heart. Unlike the ordinary awakened undead, there was a blue crystal embedded in his heart. This was not a magic crystal or any gemstone, but a soul stone. His pale fingers cut open the skin and quickly drew a series of profound magic patterns around the heart. In less than 10 seconds, the brightness of the crystal doubled. Crack! A slight crack appeared on the surface of the soul stone, but he did not care at all. Instead, he chanted an incantation, and his breath quickly became stronger. This change naturally attracted the attention of the few Grand Knights on the battlefield. Titus, who was closest to it, immediately turned his horse around and galloped over. Unexpectedly, when he was still 40 meters away, this orc suddenly raised his hand and directly released a death coil. The power of this spell was far stronger than the one Ancidin used to attack Wellington. It was larger in size and flew faster. It almost hit Titus in the blink of an eye. Bang! Holy Shield and Battle Aura Shield instantly shattered, and the recoil knocked Titus, who could not dodge in time, off his horse. Akasha! Help! Sally was too far away. At this time, she could only open her mouth to ask this opponent for help. The latter also knew the severity of the situation and immediately cast intermediate healing and rushed over. But when Akasha poured a few mouthfuls of potion into his mouth, Titus directly fell into a coma before he could even say a word. Akasha hurriedly pressed his neck, and only after confirming that this Grand Knight was still alive did she let out a sigh of relief. But this scene really made her a little shocked. The most powerful knight in the team was actually seriously injured with one blow. What kind of character was this? Raising her head, she saw a very shocking scene. The orc waved his staff and brought up a large amount of white mist. When this thick mist adhered to the surrounding zombies, it immediately turned into a set of thick bone armor. And under the influence of the white mist, the originally slow-moving zombies' eyes lit up with red light, and their movements became several times faster. Akasha watched as one of the zombies jumped up like a frog and directly pounced on a knight from his horse. Then, the knight used only the bone armor on his arm to block the blade, and then immediately fought with the other party. Undead enhancement spell? A normal necromancer's enhancement spell could generally only affect 10 to 30 people, but this opponent strengthened more than 150 zombies with a wave of his hand. Not only that, when he cast the spell for the second time, the corpses on the ground began to be crushed by a force, and the scattered flesh and blood instantly condensed into 12 huge flesh puppets, and then quickly joined the orc's line of defense. Proficiency in summoning and puppets. Akasha had a little understanding of the necromancy system, and knew that this was almost impossible. Whoosh! The opponent continued to cast the spell. With a wave of his hand, he released a bone spear spell that hit 7 or 8 knights near him, killing 3 of them on the spot. Akasha was completely frightened by this orc's performance. Not only was he proficient in 2 elements, he was proficient in 3, and his strength was far beyond the scope of an ordinary necromancer. As the opponent cast one spell after another, the knights that had just been like a hot knife cutting through butter began to suffer a large number of casualties under the continuous attacks. Akasha stared at the orc with her eyes wide open, and found that there were cracks flashing with blue light on the orc's head and cheeks, as if his entire body was going to explode at any time. Hold on. Hold them off, and we will win. Not far away, Goddard was shocked by the strength of the black-robed orc, but he was overjoyed, because this meant that his troops could possibly win this battle. But just as he finished shouting, the flashing light in front of them made all the orcs' hearts sink. After the cavalry's charge, the human infantry arrived. Although they were physically exhausted, the soldiers still picked up their weapons and rushed into the battlefield. Not only the barbarian heavy-armored soldiers, the Holy War Army infantry, and the nobles' private soldiers, but even the nobles themselves joined the battle. They knew very well that this was a battle of life and death, and no one was allowed to be careless. There were too many students who cast their monthly votes yesterday, and I couldn't remember them all. I'm sorry, but I can't list them all. I bow to thank everyone for their support. Thank you for your monthly votes. Let Rumors Come True, Borning_Board, Dante Lewis, Samlage, Hoshino Porcupine, Strange Apple, Laughing Demon, Unyuenyi. Thank you for your support, Happy Tour Square Root Dream Deepwater Bomb. Chapter 495. The nobles put on the metal armor provided by their private soldiers and held their swords that were already bent. Just like their ancestors 70 years ago, they charged into the battle formation of the foreign races without any regret. Blood splattered. In the elongated light of the holy light spell, the morale of the human army was high. The orc army had already been cut into pieces by the cavalry. There were less than 70 people who could still fight. Although there were many undead on the periphery, most of them were no different from would due to the effects of the divine spell scrolls. Therefore, when the 200 infantrymen charged over, they almost effortlessly pressed down the front line. Nephi didn't stay behind with the injured. Instead, she charged over under the protection of Irwin and the others. Arcanists were especially powerful in this kind of chaotic battle. She didn't rely on powerful killing spells to destroy the enemy. Instead, she used various control spells to assist in killing the enemy. To the guards led by Irwin, the enemies in front of them were almost no different from sheep tied to a pole. They only needed to swing their battle axes to kill them. They didn't even need to kill them. Catherine was not far from Nephi. She didn't have much fighting power, but after a few attempts, she completely let go of everything. This noble girl never thought that one day, she would actually roar like a man and chop down the zombies in front of her. Even though their throats were hoarse from all the shouting, she and the soldiers around her never thought of stopping. They fought with all their might because they knew they had nowhere else to go. Goddard's position had long been torn apart by the cavalry. Now, the only ones who still had the ability to resist were him and the guards around him. Although the undead had the advantage in numbers, the only ones who could still fight were Augustine and his 150 undead subordinate. The two leaders were very clear that if they couldn't stop this wave of attack, they would definitely die. Therefore, be it Goddard or the black-robed orc, they both made the most violent counterattack. The body of the orc elite with the battle axes expanded rapidly as he roared. Goddard's advanced profession was Wolf Knight. Although he didn't have the help of a wolf, he could still enter berserk mode and crush the human soldiers in front of him with unparalleled speed. Because he was too powerful, he led a dozen people on foot to launch a countercharge and directly collided with the incoming infantry. None of the soldiers in front of him could withstand a single blow. Apart from swinging his battle axe, his punches and kicks were often enough to severely injure ordinary soldiers. Corpse explosion. The black-robed orc suddenly waved his staff, and a dozen corpses on the ground exploded one after another. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. More than 10 knights on their horses were thrown off their horses. Even the Wellington knight could not avoid it and was blown away on the spot. He was not casting spells randomly, but he was precisely disrupting the rhythm of the human troop. Wherever the line of defense was about to be breached, spells would be cast like a storm, causing a large number of casualties in an instant. Akasha and Sally could only resist in front of him, and they were almost hit by the entanglement of death several times. There was no room for them to fight back. During this time, several arrows were shot at him from all directions, but they were all easily blocked by the bone shield floating beside him. However, the bone spear technique that the black-robed orc man used to counterattack never hit Roddy. A mouse that only dares to shoot arrows in the dark. His voice was a little angry, and he immediately increased the strength of his attack line. But after a few seconds, an instinctive sense of danger made him quickly stop casting spells and dodge half a step to the side. Swoosh! Under the dim light, a bright blade slashed across the position where he was just standing. The black-robed orc was surrounded by more than 30 strengthened zombies and flesh puppets, but these subordinates did not notice that there was a different kind among them. Camouflage. Undead was obviously more useful than Roddy had imagined. But his camouflage was still seen through by the black-robed orc. After the vertical slash of great strength strike missed, Roddy immediately realized that he had made a mistake. He immediately activated Quick Reaction and dodged the opponent's Bone Spear technique by a hair's breadth. The white bone slashed across his chest. Instead of advancing, Roddy took a step back and tried to deal a heavy blow to the enemy in close combat. Unexpectedly, the orc took a few steps back methodically and chanted a spell, turning his white bone wand into a dagger, blocking Roddy's second strike. Roddy felt that something was wrong when he slashed down with the dagger. His swordsmanship was only at the beginner level, and it was only useful in a chaotic battle. In terms of attainments, he was no match for Sodeler. But the opponent had just casually blocked it, and Roddy felt depressed as if he had nowhere to use his strength. Could this guy's swordsmanship be stronger than Sodeler's? While he was thinking, the enemy's bone sword had already wrapped around the blade of purification with a twist of his wrist, and after a casual shake, Roddy was disarmed. The blade of purification was sent flying, and Roddy knew that he was in trouble. Not only was the opponent proficient in all kinds of undead spells, but even his swordsmanship was so powerful. Since when did Tasman have such a guy? But now he had no time to sigh. Seeing the enemy pointing at him with another hand, Roddy's heart trembled, and he instinctively activated the Ring of Pardon. Bang! The instant cast, Death Coil, exploded in a flash of golden light at close range. Roddy knew that he could not hold back now. He raised his left hand and immediately tore open the Ice Blade Storm scroll he had been holding. This was one of Solomon's treasures. Its power was not as powerful as the Flame Blast, a large-scale spell, but it was faster. The moment the scroll was torn, countless ice blades flew straight towards the black-robed orc. However, the next moment, Roddy saw the orc's feet sway as he dodged the ice blades. Hundreds of ice blades flew out, and because of the large range, one of the orc's arms was cut off. But compared to the flesh puppet in front of him, which had turned into minced meat, this scroll was almost useless, opportunistic. The black-robed orc roared and slashed down with his bone sword. At this distance, physical attacks were obviously faster than spellcasting. Because Roddy had not stopped releasing the scroll, he could not dodge and could only bite the bullet and rush forward. After activating the Tortoise Shield skill, he raised his left arm to block and activated the arcane blade on his right wrist, stabbing straight at the orc's neck. Crack! The dragon skin armor and the tortoise shield barely blocked the sword, but the huge recoil made Roddy lose his balance. As a result, the arcane blade, in his right hand, did not hit the orc's vital point and only stabbed into the orc's collarbone. The two passed each other and exchanged positions. Roddy turned and prepared to fight again, but the black-robed orc narrowed his eyes and stared straight at Roddy. "You're a witcher!" "What?" Roddy was shocked. There was almost no record of this profession in history, and he was the last witcher. How did the orc recognize his profession? But after this sentence, the undead sorcerer's hostility seemed to soar several times. He raised his wand with his remaining arm and said coldly, "Heretic, accept your judgment." Roddy's eyes narrowed as he vaguely guessed the opponent's identity. So he did not fight head-on, but activated the arcane impact skill on his leather boots and the glide spell on his belt. He jumped 7 or 8 meters in the air, and then with a leap, he instantly jumped over the surrounding undead soldiers and left the battlefield. The black-robed orc stared at Roddy and waved his hand, ordering all the undead around to surround Roddy. "Kill him!" The sudden change surprised Sally and the others. The undead suddenly changed their target, causing the pressure on the cavalry and infantry to plummet. In other words, Roddy had relied on his own strength to directly attract the hatred of almost all the undead. It seemed that in the eyes of the black-robed orc, the success or failure of the battle was not as important as killing this witcher. Crack! Overseer Goddard was leading the charge in another direction. His strength was so great that no one could stop him. Even the heavily armored barbarian soldiers were all cut down by him. However, at this moment, his battle-axe was unexpectedly blocked by a burly man's battle-axe. Not only that, the man roared angrily and flipped his axe, pushing Goddard's axe away and stabbing at him. Goddard frowned and twisted the axe in his hand, wanting to use his strength to knock the opponent's axe away. But he did not expect the guy in front of him to be as strong as him. The two battle axes clattered, and a stalemate occurred again. Ha! Irwin, who had been enhanced by frenzy and bloodlust, was red in the face. He raised his leg and kicked away an orc who came to help, but this also revealed an opening. Goddard elbowed him in the chest and forced him to take a few steps back. In terms of strength, Irwin was still no match for this warlord. If not for the fine iron armor, his chest would probably have been smashed. But at this moment, he did not care about his injuries and continued to fight with the soldiers beside him. Goddard frowned, feeling the pressure in front of him increase a lot. He immediately looked to the side and found that the undead that had been fighting together 100 meters away had collectively changed direction and were actually chasing a human. This scene was extremely absurd for a commander. There were more than 300 enemies on this battlefield, but why did this group of undead insist on chasing a single target? Moreover, that guy was like a loach, fleeing through the gaps in the crowd and even dodging the bone prison and bone wall spells. Did this group of undead take the wrong medicine? If he was allowed to lure the undead away alone, how was he going to fight this battle? Goddard cursed in his heart, but at this moment, his breakout team was fighting alone. If they continued forward, they would definitely be surrounded and killed. The only way to break out of the encirclement was to immediately join forces with the undead. At the very least, they could escape together. It was better than being surrounded and killed. Thinking of this, he was not in the mood to continue fighting head-on with Irwin and the others. He immediately led the soldiers to the side. His goal was very clear: take a shortcut and capture Roddy, who was fleeing nearby. Only then would he have a way out. Chapter 496. Whoosh! Arrows shot out one after another. 2 orcs in front of him were hit and fell to the ground. Roddy flew past their bodies and scanned the surroundings with the eyes of the world of witchers. Then, he twisted his body and dodged the bone prison that appeared under his feet by a hair's breadth. Then, he reached out and pulled a nearby undead to his back, barely blocking the death coil that was coming at him. Roddy actually wanted to pull these undead and run away from the battlefield. However, the black-robed orc was too strong and he had no choice. He had to say that World of Witchers once again played a big role. Under the spells, he used all his strength to dodge. If it wasn't for this skill that could see through the trajectory of the spells, he would have been knocked down by the enemy. In the eyes of Sally and the others, everything that happened in these 40 seconds was the biggest turning point of the battle. The undead army suddenly changed direction, and the stubborn resistance of the orcs also changed direction. From a strategic point of view, the defense line between the orcs and the undead had completely collapsed. This meant that the pressure on the human army from the front had disappeared. Next, they only needed to attack the side or even the back of the enemy. Roddy's original intention was to assassinate the enemy leader, but he didn't expect that he would inadvertently create such a turning point. However, he also paid a heavy price for this. In the next 40 seconds, Roddy became the focus fire of the entire battlefield. Although he used the skill of crystal embedding to block 4 attacks of various sizes and activated full strength and full concentration to dodge with all his might, facing such a siege, he still couldn't avoid being hit by bone spear twice. One of the bone spears pierced through his abdomen, leaving a bloody hole. The moment the skill effect disappeared and his footsteps slowed down, the impact of the large-scale corpse explosion finally shook Roddy to the ground. He tried to get up, but found that zombies were pouncing at him from all directions in his vision. The ferocious expressions of the enemies could be seen clearly, but the world was abnormally quiet because of the temporary deafness. The large secretion of adrenaline made him unable to feel the pain in his abdomen. The moment the holy light spell bloomed above his head, the blurred light and shadow made Roddy feel that everything was like a thick impressionist oil painting. But this is not a one-man battle. In the next moment, Zodler led the cavalry to tear apart the enemy's formation from the side and directly cut down the undead in front of Roddy. Akasha followed behind and released the wall of truth that she had long prepared, instantly blocking most of the enemies on the side. The defense of the wall of truth was far stronger than that of an ordinary shield. Because Roddy was never stingy with the best casting materials for his own people, the wall was 20 meters wide and 3 meters thick. When the undead came into contact with it, it could even burn and seriously injure them with the holy power. Roddy took a deep breath, stood up and shouted, "Akasha, tell them to speed up." But after he finished speaking, he found that he could not hear what Akasha said at all. When he turned his head, Wellington and Irwin had already led the infantry to attack, and he could vaguely see the figures of Sally and Naife. The combination of arcane and divine spells helped the soldiers to push the enemies away. Their goal was simple: to protect Roddy from the encirclement. Go save Roddy. Sally was far away from Roddy, so she could only desperately shout at Akasha, who was riding on a horse. The latter naturally did not need to say anything. After jumping off the warhorse, she immediately supported the staggering Roddy. Just as she was about to retreat, she glimpsed a black figure in the distance approaching rapidly. She used the holy shield in front of her to protect herself, but the next moment she was pushed to the side by Roddy. "Get out of the way!" After sprinting, Goddard's battle leap directly crossed a distance of more than 10 meters and directly chopped down at Roddy from the sky. The tomahawk easily broke the shield, but because the two dodged, it smashed on the ground. Boom! All the power of the shock wave skill was released at the same time, smashing a large pit with a radius of 1 meter on the ground. Meanwhile, Roddy and Akasha were directly shaken and directly flew 3 meters away. The warlord knew that Roddy was the target of the undead, so he turned around and swung his axe at Roddy. In his opinion, as long as he killed Roddy, there was still hope for this battle to turn around. At the same time, the black-robed orc at the back also simultaneously made a casting gesture, targeting directly at Roddy. Zodler was galloping here, but he was still 7 or 8 meters away from Goddard and could not catch up with him. Sally was chanting a spell, but the holy shield obviously could not block the attack of 2 strong men. Wellington and Elvin also had no time to look back. But just as Roddy was about to bite the bullet and take the attack, a small figure suddenly rushed out of the crowded line. Naife raised her hands and simultaneously activated the 2 scrolls in her hands 3 meters away from Roddy. Her figure was too small on the battlefield, not even comparable to one of Goddard's legs, but the gorgeous high-level scroll in her hands was so powerful that no one could ignore it. The moment the seal of the scroll was broken, the light instantly lit up the battlefield. A huge ice barrier immediately appeared in front of Roddy. The ice crystals emitted a cold air and refracted a large amount of colorful light. This was the colorful ice barrier that could only be cast by an archmage. Although its name was prefixed to the ice barrier, its defensive power was several levels higher. Goddard's subsequent all-out attack only left a white mark on the barrier. There was not even a crack. At the same time, a sphere portal with a diameter of 2 meters appeared behind Roddy. This was the most precious of all the scrolls, the elemental plane summoning scroll. It could directly create a plane crack and randomly summon an elemental creature to fight for half an hour. The reason why Naife used these 2 scrolls was that she instinctively judged that the black-robed orc's magic was more threatening. With her profound knowledge of magic, she knew very well that the best defense was actually not the plastic shield formed by elements or arcane magic, but the space barrier. However, she did not expect that her instantaneous judgment almost saved the lives of the whole team. This was because the black-robed orc did not use necromancy magic, but a forbidden spell called Dark Devour. Its power was beyond everyone's imagination. When the shadow of a black crow whizzed out, the surrounding undead were all frozen in place because of the violent elemental shock. The spell silently swept across the air and fiercely hit the rotating sphere portal. Half of the water elemental lords that walked out of the portal were split into pieces on the spot. The portal that was more than a meter in diameter suddenly stopped working, and then quickly expanded more than twice its original size. Just when everyone thought it was about to explode, the sphere portal suddenly collapsed with a swoosh. A spell was so powerful that it actually shattered the plane portal. This result was completely beyond Naifei's understanding, and she was dumbfounded. Crack! The crystal on the black-robed orc's chest suddenly broke, and the flesh on his face began to fall to the ground piece by piece. Clearly, this attack had used up almost all of his strength. However, seeing that Roddy was still alive, he reluctantly raised his arm again. Facing such a powerful enemy, Naifei could not help but feel anxious. But in order to protect Roddy behind her, she still looked determined and instantly cast a spell. Levitation spell. The broken sword under the black-robed orc's feet suddenly rose up and accurately knocked against the opponent's wrist that was making a casting gesture. The direction of the bone spear spell actually deviated, and it swept past the top of Roddy's head. This kind of low-level mistake made him furious, but before he could cast another spell, suddenly more than 10 blue streaks suddenly appeared in the night sky. In the next second, dense explosions instantly engulfed the necromancer. Behind the battlefield, a well-armed high elf army charged out silently. They held long swords in their hands and directly killed their way into the back of the orc army, directly forming an encirclement with the human army. This was the undead guard that he had brought with him when he left Elson City. Previously, Roddy had asked Akasha to control them to hide in the forest at the foot of the mountain. They only started to climb up when the counterattack was launched. Until now, they had finally arrived at the battlefield. If there were only 100 infantry reinforcements, perhaps they would not have been able to make a decisive impact at this time. However, when 14 Arcanists suddenly appeared in the team, this team had absolute strategic significance. Akasha had mentioned to Roddy that there were necromancers in the undead guard, but Roddy only thought that they were low-level necromancers who could only cast resurrection and bone armor spell. He did not expect that they were mid-level arcanists who could cast all kinds of spells continuously. It should be known that there were only 5 or 6 spellcasters on the battlefield at this time. When the 14 mid-level arcanists joined in, Arcane Explosion, Arcane Impact, Arcane Missile, and other skills almost instantly drowned the black-robed orcs and plowed through the entire front line, completely collapsing the enemy's last resistance. Goddard saw the change of the battle situation on the other side of the colorful ice barrier. He knew that he had no way to retreat, so he simply glanced back and directly targeted Sally, who was closer to him. Because after a few encounters, he already knew that characters like Sodeler and Wellington were difficult to kill directly. So, he raised his battle axe and directly pounced on the extremely conspicuous Efter and Duke in the crowd. "Sally, be careful." Akasha immediately sensed the opponent's intention and immediately shouted a warning. But when Sally on horseback turned around, Goddard had already knocked 4 or 5 guards into the air and was only 30 feet away from her. She was stunned for a moment and immediately understood that it was too late for her to dodge. So, she simply gave up on casting defensive magic and directly raised her hand, ready to use the breath of the Balrog on the ring to meet the opponent head-on. But then Sally realized that she had underestimated the opponent's speed. In the blink of an eye, the huge figure once again knocked away several guards and dodged Wellington's battle or a doppelganger that came to support. He had already rushed to a place 12 meters in front of her. If the length of the battle axe was taken into account, even if the breath of the Balrog was successfully released in a second, Sally would probably be cut into pieces. But at this moment, a large patch of grayish-white bones suddenly appeared in front of him, quickly condensing into a bone wall that wasn't very tall. Goddard could ignore the holy shield, but the extremely tough bones were the natural enemy of cold weapons. Thus, he had no choice but to break the bone wall first. Crack! Shards of bone fell on Sally's body, but she still didn't move. Instead, she clearly chanted the final activation incantation. Goddard's bloody breath almost sprayed on Sally's face, but before he could wave the battle axe again, the breath of the Balrog had already been released. The power of the breath of the Balrog Lord from the elemental plane was comparable to the flaming storm. The violent impact blew the orc warlord away on the spot, and a few seconds later, his body turned into ashes in the high temperature. The power of this spell was so strong that 2 guards nearby were engulfed in the flames and lost their lives. Sally, who had just escaped from the gates of hell, took a deep breath. She glanced at the shattered bones on the ground and immediately realized that it was this spell that saved her. She turned her head to look at her side. Akasha, who was panting heavily, looked at her in the eyes. Both of them felt a little strange. ******** monthly votes gratitude. Do Tycoon Products, Fire Meteor, September Duke, Inscriber, Water Rabbit. Chapter 497. At that moment, Akasha actually had no other choice. As the highest-level clergyman in the team, she knew very well that the shield she cast could not stop the warlord's act. And on this battlefield full of corpses and the undead, Bone Wall was the most suitable choice. When Akasha studied necromancy, she would naturally study the structure of the spell, and later on she would also try it out. She found that she could actually cast a few low-level spells as a research object, so she did some practice. Bone Wall was one of the most basic spells of necromancers. Its defense was largely dependent on the composition of the material used to cast the spell, and the size of the bone wall was determined by the level and mana of the mage. For example, the bone wall formed by the black-robed orc was tens of meters long because of his profound mana, but Akasha could only form about 2 meters with all her strength. The difference was self-evident. But being able to block the attack was a good spell, and Akasha did not regret this. What she was worried about at this time was the fact that she used necromancy. The most important thing was that all of this was clearly seen by a priest of the Rose Cross. Akasha was very nervous for a moment. Would Sally directly order people to arrest her? According to the arbitration method of the Vatican, she would definitely be dragged to the stake, not to mention that the Duke in front of her was a love rival who had always had a cold relationship with him. As a member of the Viper Cross, Akasha had seen too many dark and despicable means, so she immediately thought that Sally would use this to directly get rid of her. But after she looked at Sally helplessly for a few seconds, she saw Sally raise her hand and release a holy purification, turning the bone wall into a piece of unrecognizable debris without a trace. Akasha was stunned, but Sally no longer cared about the bones on the ground. She jumped off the restless horse and waved her hand. "Let's go, Roddy is calling us over." Okay. Akasha was a little dizzy. Sally was obviously helping her clean up the traces, but was she really willing to stand on her side? Or was she planning to use this matter to negotiate with him later? Roddy, who was dozens of meters away, didn't know how the 2 priests were feeling. He had just downed a potion and pulled Nephi behind him. He stared at the black-robed beast-man not far away. His opponent's body had already been blasted to smithereens by an arcane technique. His 2 legs were a bloody mess, and his remaining arm was charred black. Only 2 eyes remained on his disfigured face, still emitting a faint light. Pada. Hearing the footsteps, the necromancer tried his best to move his head. When he saw clearly that the person approaching was Roddy, his gaze froze, and his rotten mouth immediately moved slightly, but before he could chant the spell of self-destruction, Akasha's group silence directly interrupted his casting, and Sally's holy shackles locked his body, making him lose all ability to resist. Naife took out a flame blast scroll and stared at Kirin without blinking. In order to clean up the nobles of Efta, you are really willing to pay a heavy price. Roddy ignored the opponent's resentful gaze. He squatted down, almost face to face with the guy in front of him, and said calmly, "I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint you this time, Augustine." Sally and Akasha suddenly widened their eyes. They looked at each other, as if to confirm that they did not hear wrongly. The price to pay for a soul incarnation is not small. You will have to recuperate for a few years. The effect of group silence only lasted for 3 seconds, so Roddy did not talk to the opponent before taking action like in some movies. Before his voice died away, he grabbed the crystal on the opponent's chest with lightning speed and pulled it out with a "ka" sound. The disappearance of the crystal turned the body into a pile of rotten flesh in the blink of an eye. But the next moment, a white ring suddenly lit up in Roddy's left eye. It's not good to be angry out of humiliation, huh? There was a touch of coldness in Roddy's eyes. The moment he grabbed the crystal, the will inside tried to attack his mind, but with the mark of the Dragon Slayer, this attack was completely ineffective. But some information mixed in this mental attack confirmed Roddy's guess in his heart. The opponent was none other than the monarch of Tasman. It sounded a little unbelievable, but Roddy was already familiar with this method. In his memory, Tasman's invasion of the human world was led by Augustine several times. As a monarch, he naturally would not enter the battlefield himself. Instead, he would use a high-level spell like Soul Incarnation to split a part of his soul to control a body. Incarnation was different from doppelgangers. The doppelgangers, created by Wellington and Sodeler, were actually accessories that were controlled. Incarnation, on the other hand, was an individual that was close to being independent. In other words, it was the will inside the crystal that controlled the black-robed orcs to carry out the plan, and not Augustine himself, who was thousands of miles away. This body's original strength was only at level 10. In order to turn the situation around, he forcibly overdrew the power of the incarnation crystal to advance to level 30. But in the end, he did not win the final victory. The failure of the incarnation meant that Augustine had completely lost a part of his soul. For a high-ranking lich, this was definitely a heavy blow. Will and soul. Roddy squinted and carefully recalled the characteristics of the crystal in his hand. Soul incarnation was not completely independent. It still fundamentally accepted the orders of Augustine's main body. So after thinking for a while, he did not immediately destroy it. Instead, he wrapped it in a piece of cloth and put it in a fine iron helmet. The shielding effect of metal on magic could temporarily ensure that it would not affect anyone. Roddy, did you just say that he was Augustine? Sally stared at the broken corpse and asked hesitantly. It's that old bag of bones, Tasman. Obviously, he planned everything from the beginning to the end. What an old fox. He really leaves no trace. Roddy looked at the battlefield where victory was already decided and gave up on the idea of continuing to fight. He touched the wound on his abdomen and sucked in a breath of cold air in pain. Hiss, that was really dangerous. I was almost wiped out. Although that was what he said, in fact, Roddy's team had always held the initiative in the process of counterattack. The team allocation, the control of the situation, and the use of the environment were all done to the extreme. If analyzed, almost every detail could be included in a military textbook. But Roddy was not interested in thinking about this, because after the battle stabilized, Naifei had already thrown herself into his arms. After all, the little girl had not experienced anything big. Augustine's terrifying forbidden magic made her extremely afraid. The fear of almost losing Roddy made her legs tremble. "Okay, it's okay now." Roddy patted her back gently. "You saved my life, Naifei." The little girl was speechless and just hugged his neck even harder. "I won't say thank you, because you are my best friend, right?" When saying this, Roddy felt that some obsession in his heart had finally been put down. Naifei is not young anymore. She is not a child anymore. She is very powerful. She did not show mercy even when facing Tasman's monarch. "I saw that you had the upper hand in the duel with Augustine. In fact, it was just a levitation spell, that was just right." Naifei opened her mouth, but no words came out of her mouth. Compared to the thrilling experience just now, she was more excited by Roddy's affirmation of her. "Roddy, your wound is still bleeding." Sally's voice came from the side, and Naifei immediately came back to her senses. She quickly let go of her hand to check on Roddy's injury, but he waved his hand. "The battle is not over yet. Go and help them. Arcanists are not responsible for healing." Yes, Commander." She clumsily imitated the soldier's response, then turned around and rushed to the battlefield with her wand. Her childish but determined figure made Roddy laugh. But when he looked back, he found that the situation in front of him was a little strange. "Akasha, we don't have enough bandages. I have some. Here." Akasha took off the leather armor on Naifei's left arm to check, while Sally took the bandages from her hand to bandage the bloody hole in her abdomen. The two's movements were very tacit, and there was no cold estrangement between them in the past that, "Stay here. Don't talk. Have a good rest." As soon as Roddy opened his mouth, the two busy priests immediately shut him up. Did something happen? Roddy's mind was filled with doubts, but he did not ask any more questions. Instead, he turned his eyes to the battlefield. The noise gradually died down. At this time, only sporadic fighting and roars could be heard. The air was filled with a strong rancid smell. This was because many of the undead were transformed from the corpses that had been dead for many days. Roddy frowned and immediately ordered the soldiers to burn these corpses to prevent the possibility of an outbreak of the plague. The few mages' mana was almost depleted, and there was no longer a dense holy light spell to illuminate the area. Under such circumstances, the undead under Akasha's control became the most efficient army. The high elves raised their swords and quickly nibbled away the fleeing enemies. The 14 arcanists also spread out and attacked the enemies that had already fled far away with Naifei. When the sun gradually rose, everyone could see the situation around them clearly. Sally looked at the few arcanists with cold expressions and suddenly said in a low voice, "I feel that these elves are not right. They are the undead." Roddy's answer made Sally's expression stiffen. But she quickly thought of something. She looked at Akasha and asked, "Roddy, you can summon the undead?" When it was that Ansidin. I used the scroll that he left behind." Roddy did not want to say that these were summoned by Akasha because he was afraid that Sally would directly stand on the opposite side. But before he could finish explaining, Akasha bit her lips and said, "I summoned them. These undead are now under my command." Akasha was afraid that Roddy would be tainted because of this. She did not want the Rose Cross to issue a warrant for Roddy's arrest. But the way the two of them took the blame for each other made Sally secretly clench her teeth. This duke pouted and said, "Why are you two still fighting? It's as if I'm a member of the religious court of inquiry." They suddenly said that they were going to crack down on pornography with unprecedented intensity. The standard of pornography was stuck at the standard of holding hands. Anything over the standard would be considered a violation. I think what I wrote was already very clear, and then Qi Dian blocked it. It's really helpless. Chapter 498. Hearing Sally's words, Roddy and Akasha looked at each other and did not explain further. I know what's important. You don't have to look at me like that. Sally sighed. When she looked up, the golden sun was already shining through the horizon. The surviving humans finally saw the appearance of the high elf guards. Many of them gasped in surprise. After all, elves rarely appeared in front of humans. It was strange to see more than 100 of them at once. They won't be affected by the sun? No. Unless we use a holy spell to shine directly on them, most people won't be able to see the difference. If we get close, will there be any flaws? I made them pretend to be breathing. They won't be able to detect the problem unless they stick close to them and listen to their heartbeat. There are such undead? This is the first time I've heard of it. Akasha and Sally started talking among themselves. This made Roddy feel like he was in the background. He coughed dryly. My injury is nothing serious, but just to be safe. Sally, have the Rose Cross team move back. This was something that had to be done. Sally could ignore the undead, but if a clergyman came out and made a fuss, the problem would be much more serious. The Duchess also realized that there was still a lot of work to be done. After carefully confirming that there was no problem with Roddy's bandages, she gestured to Akasha and trotted away. Her attitude made Roddy feel a little strange. On the other hand, Akasha did not show any emotion. Her eyes were drooping as if she had something on her mind. Roddy thought that his injury was stable. He then had Akasha do her best to treat the wounded. After the little priest left, Roddy finally had the energy to look around. But as far as the eye could see, there was only chaos. Other than the numb soldiers walking around, there was only blood and corpses. Sodeler! Here! Sodeler, covered in blood, ran over from afar. At his waist was a broken sword that he had picked up from who knew where. The blade was broken into several pieces, and his armor was mottled with slashes, but he was still in good spirits. Roddy bared his teeth. Shouting made his wounds hurt badly, but he still endured the pain and said, Don't let any orcs escape. Send people with cavalry to chase after them. Kill every one of them that escapes down the mountain. Understood. Sodeler turned to leave, but he was stopped by Roddy. Also, have Erwin bring a few people here alive. I have to ask them why they would go crazy and come here. It was hard to calculate the number of casualties, but as Roddy looked at the corpses on the ground, he understood that this battle was quite tragic. Even though Augustine's avatar was only at level 30, Knight Titus almost died under the death coil, not to mention the ordinary soldiers who were implicated. The partial loss made Roddy sigh, but he was more worried about Augustine's position in this incident. What was this old man trying to do? What was Tasman's goal? Why did he recognize the profession of Witcher and insist on killing me? Roddy was not even in the mood to look at the mission reward. He looked up and locked his eyes on a few orc captives that Erwin had pushed over, **************. Only a few were as calm as Roddy. For the nobles who had fought with all their might, this was probably the longest night of their lives. Catherine slumped to the ground and took deep breaths of the chilly morning air. Her strained arm was in extreme pain due to overexertion. Her underwear was soaked in sweat, and she shivered when the wind blew. She panted for a long time before she recovered from her crazy and bloodthirsty state. She gradually heard the voices around her. We survived, the enemies are all dead. We won, the perilous situation had finally turned into a desperate counterattack. These people felt like they were in a dream. But when the light of dawn appeared in front of them, there were no cheers. No one could be happy. The corpses in front of them were piled up like a mountain. Among them were their comrades who had just died in battle, the nobles' private soldiers who had been turned into undead, and countless farmers and villagers in coarse clothes. Orc corpses only took up a small portion of the corpses. More than 90% of the corpses in the camp in front of the mine belonged to humans. In other words, this inhumane battle meant that thousands of people from the kingdom of Karen had died overnight. Damn undead scum! Baron Kalaman, who was beside him, cursed under his breath. He had been stabbed and could barely stand after being bandaged. His face was pale and ugly. This kind of scum who only knows how to hide in the shadows will be purified sooner or later. However, Kathleen knew that these were just empty words. Under the current circumstances, the kingdom of Karen could not organize an army to fight against the undead. Not to mention that the royal family had always advocated friendly coexistence with the undead. So this time, they could only bite the bullet and swallow it. Putting aside these frustrations and humiliation for the time being, when the danger to her life disappeared, the grief of her father's death gradually drowned Catherine. Thinking of the current situation of her clan, she even felt a little dizzy for a moment. She accidentally tripped and fell straight to the side, thud. Just when Catherine thought that she was going to fall to the ground, a hand reached out and held her arm firmly. After taking a closer look, she saw the hem of a simple yet luxurious robe. Looking up, she realized that the person holding her was a beautiful high elf. The high elf was half a head taller than her and had a straight posture. He had a wand at his waist. His face was cold and expressionless, and his eyes were as calm as a lake. Kathleen immediately recognized that this was the high elf magician who had won the battle. She immediately became much more respectful. Thank you. This battle is all thanks to you." The high elf arcanist gently let go of her hand and looked at her silently. Kathleen bowed and continued, May I ask, are you a magician under Lord Roddy?" She knew that with this battle, the power of the kingdom had changed drastically. No matter what the result was, her family would have to advance and retreat together with Roddy. So Kathleen wanted to know more about the power behind him, but the magician looked at her for a moment and suddenly said, "Baz, Ithala." Kathleen was stunned. She immediately understood that there was a language barrier. She had never learned the High Elf language, so they naturally could not communicate. After saying that, the magician nodded and left. Although his attitude was cold, he did not lose his manners. This made Kathleen, who had always been known for being good at socializing, feel a little touched. But not far away, Akasha, who was looking down at the wounded, suddenly turned her head and looked at them. As the commander of the undead, she had never listened to her subordinates speak. But the situation now was clearly beyond her control. At the same time, in Picaro City, Sienna, who had not slept all night, finally let out a sigh of relief. "Viscount Enru, it's been a hard night for you." At this point, he had already recognized the situation he was in. Even if the magicians of his family were all killed, as long as the Milner family still had the support of the royal family, no one would be able to touch him. So after sending a letter to his father asking for reinforcements, he took control of the situation. Even though Enru was the lord of a territory, Sienna did not show the slightest bit of fear. "I've already written letters to the 4 fortresses nearby. If the carrier pigeons are fast enough, they will respond this afternoon. The first batch of reinforcements will arrive the day after tomorrow. You and I, on the other hand, will no longer have to worry about those orcs. To be honest, I really don't have much experience in dealing with enemies. It's all thanks to Viscount Sienna's timely response." Enru's ability to judge the situation went without saying. He did not forget to flatter Sienna, but his eyes were constantly looking out the door. Although he did not want to fight with the Milner family, he was afraid that Sally and the other nobles would come back and cause trouble for him. Sienna knew what Enru was worried about. He waved his hand and said, "Don't worry about them. Those orcs are not stupid. No one can escape." Enru swallowed. Seeing that there was no one around, he could not help but feel anxious. But what if they are traitors? Have you forgotten that, Viscount Unruh? Sienna had already prepared an excuse. These nobles, led by Duke Ifta, conspired with the orcs. They took the opportunity of the spring hunting trip to join forces with the other lords of the Kingdom of Wreckage. It's all thanks to you and me that we managed to escape in time and save the lives of the people of Picaro. We are the heroes of the kingdom, but they will go down in history as infamy. Do you understand what I'm saying, Lord Unruh? Sienna's words were calm, but there was a hint of madness in his expression. Unruh swallowed. Although he knew that this was the only way out, when he heard it from Sienna, he still felt a chill run down his spine. To put it bluntly, this was blatant murder and framing. The crime was serious enough to destroy an entire family. It was not just a simple loss of profits. From now on, the Ifta territory would no longer exist, and the Lucifron family would become nothing more than a speck of dust in history. You're worried that they'll escape? It doesn't matter. I've already sent a letter to my father informing him of this. I've also warned the guards of the 4 fortresses to be on standby, lest these traitors lead the orcs to breach the city gates. Sienna's train of thought was straight to the point. He did not care how it happened. All he wanted was for the truth to be confirmed. Is this enough? Unruh could be considered an experienced veteran, but he still felt that this was not enough. It's not enough. Sienna narrowed his eyes. When Unruh gave him a questioning look, he continued, So now, I have another favor to ask of you, Viscount Unruh. Pick a team of cavalrymen and have them bring the orc heads I've cut off to the Imperial City. Present this information directly to His Majesty. As long as His Majesty sees my letter and the evidence, no matter what the outcome is, at least you and I will not be implicated. This was the advantage of the Milner family. Compared to the other nobles of the kingdom, Sienna knew His Majesty's modus operandi better. Charles II, who had never liked Ifta, would definitely be happy to see the truth of Sally's treason. Regardless of whether the crime of being a traitor could be confirmed or not, there was no way they could escape suspicion. For the royal family, they could only clean up any element that they could not control. So, they're doomed. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Chapter 499. Tasman, St. Karen. Because it was located to the west of the Kingdom of Karen, when the first rays of dawn illuminated the territory of Ifta, the territory of the Kingdom of the Undead was still in the darkness before dawn. Oppressive darkness covered the surroundings, and the moat flowed slowly with a lifeless aura. The palace, Aldmantius, appeared abnormally serene under the pale illumination of the torches. The well-equipped palace guards passed through the corridors as usual, and the clanking sounds of armor made the place seem even more empty and quiet. Behind a metal door with complicated patterns, Augustine, the monarch of the Kingdom of the Undead, sat peacefully in his spacious study, reading a dozen documents all night long. Like humans, the undead needed to sleep, but the undead needed to replenish and strengthen the aura of death in their bodies. If the aura of death, supporting their decaying bodies, dissipated, the undead's lifespan would also come to an end. Unless they were exceptionally talented, most of the undead's strength grew extremely slowly. Most of the undead could not advance even after hundreds of years. Even someone as talented as Augustine the Great had spent more than 400 years to get to where he was today. That was why the undead rarely provoked wars in history, but they liked to secretly weaken and destroy the strength of their neighbors. Every undead knew that if the losses of a war exceeded the limit, humans might only need a few decades to recover, but Tasman needed hundreds of years to recuperate. Only a short-lived race would like endless battles. Looking at the evaluation report on the internal conflicts in the Kingdom of Karen, Augustine made a faint comment and casually placed the parchment on the desk. But at this moment, a sudden palpitation caused him to freeze in place. 2 white flames suddenly ignited in his gray pupils, and then the flames gradually weakened and extinguished as if blown by a strong wind. What followed was an intense pain from his soul. Bang! The documents that had not left his hands exploded under the twisting force, and the fragments scattered all over the ground. Augustine shut his eyes tightly, trying his best to suppress the aura that was about to erupt. He couldn't show any signs of abnormality right now. Otherwise, the nobles of the Parliament would mercilessly destroy the next part of his plan if they discovered any clues. Failed? How is this possible? The pain of his soul avatar disappearing made him feel as if his entire body was being cut by knives. An ordinary person would probably have their will crumble under such pain and their soul would dissipate. However, Augustine forcibly suppressed the pain. Even the guards and attendants outside the study did not notice anything strange. For a full 10 minutes, Augustine stood in front of the desk like a statue without saying a word. Only his hands were slightly trembling. Only when the pain gradually dissipated did he slowly open his eyes. The sharing of his consciousness allowed him to understand what his incarnation had encountered in the Cullen kingdom. The fury in his heart rose abruptly, but he forcefully suppressed it. In the face of the failure of his plan, this monarch did not even show any excess emotions due to his strong heart. Failure? This was just a chess game that could be abandoned at any time. You want to get back at me? I'll just find an opportunity to play another round. The lifespan of the undead determined Augustine's strong resistance to pressure, so even if he was angry in his heart, he knew how to vent it. However, some other information brought about by this failure made Augustine a little more worried. With a wave of his hand, the undead monarch cleared the document fragments. He slowly blinked his eyes. After the flames in his pupils disappeared, he walked to the bookshelf with countless ancient books and softly chanted a spell. Overlapping space and time, eyes of the dead, death stare. After opening 3 high-level restrictions in a row, it was as if a bookshelf suddenly had an extra row of books. Augustine's fingertips slid across the spines of the books and finally pulled out a heavy black tome. There was no writing on the cover, but the complex patterns made people feel a chaotic and crazy emotion lingering in their hearts. There seemed to be a faint whisper in their ears. Augustine seemed to have not heard it. He gently turned the page of the pure silver forged book and glanced at the handwriting that no one had seen before. Witchers! Asterisk, 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 asterisk. This is their private operation? Beside the campfire, Sally and Duke widened their eyes in disbelief. There are more than 300 wolf riders. This is at least the entire armed force of a large tribe. It was not just Sally. In the eyes of most people, the orc tribes were always loosely organized. Even a large tribe like the Hammer of Rohar would find it difficult to gather 400 wolf riders. If not for Roddy's impression of Goddard, everyone would probably think that this was a tribal chief leading an army on an expedition. The living orc prisoners of war were interrogated by Roddy. These fellows, who knew that they had no way out, were strong but not smart. Obviously, with their intelligence, they could not understand what a super tribe meant. The scattered information left Sally and the others quite confused. But Roddy could basically guess what had happened with the memories of the past. So looking at the surrounding nobles, Roddy thought for a moment and said, from their behavior, there must have been a drastic change in the Orc Kingdom. The scattered tribes have probably begun to consolidate on a large scale. This many wolf riders are just a reconnaissance team that set out on their own. This proves that the number of orcs is far greater than we imagined. Perhaps their total number is already more than 20,000. He looked up and said slowly, in other words, war is about to begin. War. Catherine and the dozen or so surviving nobles looked at each other. It had been too long since the humans had experienced war. In the past, they had thought that war was just a small scuffle between the nobles. But after this night, the tragic reality had completely sobered them up. Just a few hundred orc wolf riders had brought uncountable losses to the kingdom. Looking at the corpses of the innocent villagers who had died and been resurrected, everyone felt a chill run down their spines. "Reporting, Commander." A soldier came over to report the casualties. Roddy did not avoid it. He looked up at the nobles and the Bishop of the Rose Cross in front of him and directly asked them to report the number. The final number of casualties was not optimistic. In the battle before dawn, the appearance of Augustine's incarnation had caused the number of casualties to be much higher than expected. 3 members of the Dragon Spear Knights had died in battle, 4 of the barbarian heavy infantry had died, and the private soldiers of the nobles and the Rose Cross troops that had rushed over had a total of 29 dead, including 3 nobles. Close to 100 people who were heavily injured or lightly injured had stabilized after treatment, but this team clearly did not have much combat power at the moment. Roddy's face was expressionless, but he could not help but curse in his heart, "Augustine, you scum, just wait for my revenge. At least most of the people have survived. Phew, now we just have to evacuate to the nearest fortress with peace of mind." A viscount at the side touched the bandage on his face and sighed softly. But after he finished speaking, he realized that the people around him were looking at him. "Viscount Masuaw, I'm afraid you've become muddle-headed from exhaustion." Sally shook her head. "One night is enough for Sienna to explain the situation to the surrounding fortresses. Now that we are traitors, which fortress do you think will open their doors to traitors?" This. Viscount Masuaw was speechless for a moment. He wanted to refute, but as a noble, his brain was not slow. After thinking for a while, he understood that this was indeed their predicament. He looked left and right at the other nobles who had been implicated and muttered in a low voice, "If we say that we only escaped the pursuit of the orcs—" Viscount Masuaw stopped daydreaming. Catherine interrupted him rudely. "Even if you kneel in front of Sienna and lick his boots to show your loyalty, do you think he will believe you? Since he has the guts to murder and slander a duke, do you think he will really be afraid of us, the lords? Do you really want to be a piece of meat on the chopping board just to linger on? Instead of holding on to such a wishful thinking, it's better to die in battle last night." Catherine seemed to have touched a sore spot in her heart. She was clearly agitated. The 2 old nobles beside her quickly held her back and comforted her in a low voice. Viscount Masuaw also knew the pros and cons, so he did not dare to refute and lowered his head in silence. Although her words were harsh, Catherine's words were the truth. Although the threat of the orcs and the undead had temporarily disappeared, the real threat was still Sienna and the royal family behind him. Even if these nobles knew that they did not commit treason, if Sienna handled things properly, treason might very well become the truth in the eyes of others. Then what should we do? Is there nowhere for us to go now? There's no point in guessing. I've already sent people to investigate the situation in the surroundings. Everyone, please rest and recover your strength. We'll talk about it when there's news. Roddy was now the leader through and through. No one would question his words. The nobles nodded and dispersed. After a day and night of exhaustion, they indeed needed sufficient rest. Erwin, split up a few teams and get someone to lead them to the surrounding mines to gather food. Yes. The rations for hundreds of people was not a small number. Under the situation where it was difficult to return to the city, they could only gather as much as possible. After giving out a series of orders, Roddy covered his wound and sat down to rest. Only then did he have the time to open the mission pane to take a look. The Judgment of the Bone Throne mission was finally displayed as completed. The huge reward of 6,720,000 EXP, 2 talent points for advancement, and 3 opportunities to enhance skills automatically appeared. However, after the mission was completed, the subsequent prompts did not appear anymore. Obviously, this epic-level mission had once again completed another stage, and no one knew when the next step would be triggered. Roddy looked at the lines of prompts. After pondering for a moment, he did not immediately use these rewards. Instead, he simply flipped through the skill pane. Enhance skills. Roddy saw the flashing description under the icon of each skill. The light yellow text showed the effects of the enhancement. In general, it could roughly increase the effect of the skill by 30%. For example, increasing the distance of leap, reducing the cooldown time, increasing the damage of concentration strike, and so on. In his memory, the rewards for enhancing skills would occasionally appear in rare high-level missions. The opportunity was extremely rare. However, with Roddy's foresight and experience, if he casually used these opportunities on skills such as leap or concentration strike, it would definitely be a waste. It did not need to take up rune slots, nor did it need to change the battle stance. It was a complete enhancement. Therefore, it was the most suitable core skill for every class. With Roddy's current level, he did not have this level of skill yet. Especially after advancing to the Elemental Summoner, the magic class, Roddy had hundreds and thousands of skills to choose from. At this moment, it was better to leave these 3 opportunities for another time. The orcs haven't even finished their invasion, but this country has already collapsed. I really didn't expect this. Thinking of the difficulties they were facing, Roddy sighed softly. However, he did not show any signs of cowardice or retreat. Instead, he slightly narrowed his eyes. Chapter 500. Time passed, and it had been 6 days since Sally and Duke were rejected by Picaro City. In these 6 days, the entire kingdom was like a pot of boiling oil. Topics such as orc invasion and Duke's treason shocked the people and the nobles. In short, no one seemed to have recovered from the shock. They could only vent their anxiety through constant arguments and discussions. The first thing that came to the minds of the commoners was their own safety. There were even villages at the borders that were prepared to flee. The other nobles, big and small, had different thoughts. Some raised their troops to prepare for war, but those who were far from the borders were more willing to wait and see. Viscount Siena was not interested at all. The only thing he cared about was his father's reply and King Charles II's words. Viscount Siena, Knight Cyro, has brought 200 cavalrymen from Donak Fortress. They will reach the city before nightfall. Got it. After listening to the soldier's report, Siena's expression was much more relaxed than it was a few days ago. Viscount Henru also heaved a sigh of relief. He sighed and said, including them, the surrounding 4 fortresses have already sent out their troops, but there's still no news of them. From the looks of it, there shouldn't be any problems. They did not want to know where the orc troops went, but Sally and her men must die. Siena emphasized the word traitor in his subsequent orders, indicating that all reinforcements had to kill the traitor without any compromises. After all, this was clearly a political battle, and it was either one of them dying or the other. There was no room for compromise. Now, it seemed that the troops were wiped out. As he was thinking, another guard came to report, Viscount Siena, Bishop Parker of Rose Cross has brought 200 men and requested to enter the city. They say they are here to investigate the disappearance of the troop. They're not slow. Siena had expected this. After all, the Rose Cross troops were still in the forest. The church would come to investigate sooner or later. But now that the facts were set, they could investigate whatever they wanted. Anyway, the church would not find trouble with a great noble like him, so there was nothing to worry about. So he waved his hand and said, treat him well, cooperate with the investigation, and tell him all the facts that need to be said. The 2 nobles were very relaxed at this moment because the raid had directly led to the death of a large group of nobles in Efta, and the 2 of them were the biggest beneficiaries. With the Minas family and Charles II cleaning up the mess, Siena and Viscount Henri only had to happily divide the inheritance. Land taxes and all kinds of resources. Just thinking about these things made them excited. However, the two of them hid it well and did not mention it. At noon, when the Milner family's troops were about to arrive at the city, Siena and Viscount Henri finally started the conversation. They quickly finished distributing the profits. There was no need to elaborate on the process. The result was, of course, satisfactory. What made Siena and Henri even more excited was the fact that His Majesty, Charles II, had also issued an announcement today. The House of Lucifron has committed treason. Their crimes are unforgivable. They are the enemy of the entire nation. Perfect. Siena almost lost his composure when he heard the news. Viscount Henri also clenched his fists in excitement. Even if there were surviving nobles who jumped out to complain about their innocence, they could only treat it as nonsense in the face of His Majesty's announcement. Although the control was not firm, with the prestige of the royal family, this announcement could be regarded as the final verdict. The reason was that Charles II had long regarded EFTA as a thorn in his side. Getting rid of a powerful noble like Sally had been his target from the beginning. Now that there was such a suitable reason and a handle on them, His Majesty, who originally wanted to take it slow, naturally could not resist the temptation of achieving success in one fell swoop. After weighing the pros and cons, he finally chose to take action. "I'm just pushing the wheel of fate along." It was said that this was Charles II in different words when he signed the announcement. "Phew, I'll have to rely on Viscount Henri to make the arrangements next. I still have to talk to Father, and maybe I'll have to meet His Majesty." Siena stretched lazily and turned to look out the window. For some reason, he felt that being an expert was lonely. However, this matter could be considered to have come to an end. Siena was eager to go home. After all, he had done an outstanding job this time and earned a huge sum of money for his family. "I've proven my ability." With a proud look on his face, he gave some simple instructions and stepped into the carriage. Escorted by more than 300 cavalrymen and 2 mages, he left Picaro City. He did not even forget to drag a rather beautiful maid with him. He wanted to vent his anger on the way back. Viscount Henri sent him off with a flattering smile. When he returned to the mayor's mansion, he was only left with pure joy. The Milner family did not really have much in their hands. On the contrary, he had the advantage of being in a favorable position. Most of the territories of the deceased lords would be taken by him. If everything went well, the territory that Henri owned would be among the top 5 in the kingdom. Rather than wealth of war, it would be more appropriate to call it wealth of national calamity, or wealth of the dead. But why would Henri care about that? He had been framed by hundreds of nobles. There was no turning back now. He took a deep breath and was thinking about how to deal with the Fuser silver mine when a soldier suddenly came in with a report. "Lord Viscount, Bishop Perique is outside the mayor's mansion. He wants to ask you about the church's troops. Tell him to wait for me in the guest hall." Since Siena had made a quick getaway, Henri naturally had to deal with the mess that was left behind. Siena did not decline the offer and straightened his luxurious robe. Henri tried her best to suppress the look of joy on her face. She rubbed her eyes hard until they turned red. Then, she put on a sorrowful expression and walked into the parlor. "Bishop Perique, what happened in the past few days is a nightmare. The existence of the traitors is a disgrace to the kingdom. That duke—" His voice was low, and just as he was about to cry in detail about how Chen Shaili had mercilessly slaughtered her compatriots, he saw the bishop in a white robe calmly waving his hand at him. "Lord Viscount Henri, I'm not the one who wants to ask questions." As he finished speaking, he turned his body slightly, and the woman in the blue robe behind him raised her head slightly. Go on, I want to hear what the Sally you're talking about has done. The Lord of Efta stared sharply at Viscount Henru. He did not bother to hide the anger in his voice. You're still alive? Henru took a step back in shock. He looked around and realized that the people in the robes were not clergymen. They were the missing nobles. Baron Colliman? Catherine? Baron Fisher? You? Clang! The door to the guest hall was slammed shut by Knight Wellington. Viscount Henru looked around with a pale face. He was completely speechless. The next day, the maid woke up in the carriage. She felt weak all over. In order to satisfy Viscount Sienna, she had used all her strength last night. Although she was weak, she still felt a little excited when she thought about the reward she would receive. From now on, she would no longer have to eat bread that was hard to swallow. She would also be able to wear luxurious clothes that she had never dared to dream of before. Although it was early spring, it was so warm in the carriage that she did not feel cold. Afraid that she would wake up Viscount Sienna, the maid got up quietly and put on her clothes. Then, she frowned in confusion. The surroundings seemed to be too quiet. According to usual habits, even if the escorting soldiers did not speak, there should be some movement from the galloping horses, the clanking of armors, and all sorts of other noises. "What's going on?" she muttered softly. She picked up the dress that Sienna had violently stripped off yesterday. Then, she realized that her fingertips were a little wet. She looked down and saw that the originally white fabric had turned crimson. She extended her vision and realized that the bed beneath her was all red. The lingering smell of blood in the air woke her up. A premonition suddenly rose in her heart. Her arms trembled as she pulled the blanket off Viscount Sienna. Ah! The high-pitched scream echoed throughout the camp, but the hundreds of guards and knights who were supposed to be on guard were all lying on the ground, unconscious. Even the horses on the periphery were lying on the ground. The only exceptions were the two middle-ranked mages who had arrows in their chests and were already dead. Hundreds of miles away. His Majesty has made up his mind this time. In the mansion, Count Milner rubbed his eyes. Although he was exhausted from handling the documents overnight, there was an undisguised joy on his face. From a political point of view, the treason and the orc attack incidents in recent days were bound to bring about a drastic change in the Kingdom of Karen. No matter what the result was, it would be a good thing for the Milner family, who had clung to the royal family. The more control the royal family had over the Kingdom of Karen, the more power the Milner family would have. Efta was finished. The Lucifron family was finished. The biggest lord in the northwest of the kingdom had fallen. The day when the Kingdom of Karen would be ruled by the royal family was just around the corner. Over the past few days, the Milner family had become the most dazzling existence in the central and southern part of the kingdom. The story of Viscount Sienna defeating the orcs with wisdom and bravely fighting against the traitor had been adapted into a popular poem in the territory. It seemed that everyone on the streets could tell the story of Sienna slaying the orcs with his sword. A stone pillar was erected in the center of the city square with an orc's head that Sienna had chopped off. Countless people praised the Count for being like father, like son. Of course, Count Milner had secretly added fuel to the fire. However, he was very happy that his useless son had finally made a name for himself. He could not stop smiling all day long. This kid has finally come to his senses. I didn't go out for nothing. After signing a few documents and sorting out a set of annexation and integration plans for Efta, he sealed it with wax and asked his servant to hand it over to Charles II. When he was about to rest, he saw the pale-faced butler pushing away a servant and rushing in from the outside. Milner was in a good mood, so he did not question him. He said, "What's the matter? Why are you so flustered? Have the orcs fought their way here?" Master, I. The butler had served the family for many years. He was steady and strict with his words. He had never lost his composure like this for decades. Milner looked at him and frowned. He immediately realized that something big had happened. What happened? Speak slowly. Young master, what happened to him? Why is he back so soon? The butler took a few deep breaths and finally said in one breath, Young master's head was hung on the stone pillar in the square this morning. His forehead was also branded with a line of words, The fate of traitors! Chapter 501. The cold wind whizzed past his face. Roddy tightened his leather jacket and curled up on the saddle of the Kelda duck. Although the temperature had risen significantly with the arrival of spring, anyone would be exhausted by the cold wind after flying for a few days straight. After the battle ended 6 days ago, Roddy immediately sent people to control the remaining mines that were still occupied to obtain supplies. He then flew to all the churches and monasteries in the nearby territories of the Rose Cross Church to seek help. What made Roddy relieved was that in the Ifta territory, the words of the royal family were far less credible than the words of the Lucifron family or the local lords. In addition, the name Roddy had already been recognized by the higher-ups of the Rose Cross. Thus, the reinforcements set off the next day and arrived at Pacaro City within 4 days. The moment they received reinforcements, Sodalar and Akasha led the undead army, which didn't need any supplies, all the way to Siena on horseback. After nightfall, they used the High Elf mage's large-scale hypnosis to kill the mages guarding Siena. Sodalar then personally killed the true traitor who was still at large. Then, Roddy hung Siena's head in the center of the Milner family's territory with the help of the Flying Mount's powerful mobility. Then, he left as if he had never been there. He did not assassinate Count Milner, nor did he cause trouble for the royal family. Instead, he left on the Kelda duck with a blank expression as if he had delivered a special delivery. This was not his irrational revenge after being schemed against by the royal family. Instead, it was the first step in his entire plan. So, politics is really something that is beyond our control. Looking at Pacaro City that was gradually becoming clearer in his vision, Roddy sighed softly. Then, he tilted his body and let the Kelda duck descend into the city. At this moment, Pacaro City had once again entered a state of martial law. There were 3 to 4 groups of people outside the city walls. Clearly, they were close to 1,000 fortress soldiers who had rushed over after receiving Siena's notice. The ones leading them were not nobles, but a few retainers of the original city lord. At this time, they were clearly not very well informed. They did not understand why the person standing on the city wall was not Viscount Siena. Of course, they were more curious about the fatty who was hung on the city gate. Not long after, these questions were answered. They didn't expect that the traitor, Duke Efter Sally, would appear on the city wall. Siena and Enru colluded with the Orc army and framed the Iferta nobles through hunting. Their crimes are unforgivable. They have been sentenced to death. The surviving lords are all here. They can testify to my words. No matter what the truth was, the presence of the lords on the city wall was enough to make the soldiers retreat. They were not the men of sacrifice of the Milner family. How could they run to the city wall while shouting, "Kill the traitors"? Therefore, after Sally expressed her stance, the soldiers all expressed their willingness to obey the High Lord's order and chose to return the way they came. They didn't even mention entering the city. As for the traitor or whatever, no one said a word. Sally, who was wearing a priest's robe, left the city wall with the other lords after she finished speaking. After the incident, these nobles had no choice but to stand on the same side as her. No matter how much they had disobeyed the Lucifron family in the past, at least from now on, they had no way out. The matter in Pacaro City has come to an end here. The rest is up to you. Sally said this with a calm look in her eyes. Then, she said no more and left under the escort of the guards. The rest of the lords looked at each other with grim expressions, and each of them walked in a different direction. They had a lot of things to do. Some were preparing to write letters, some immediately returned to their territories to set up defenses, and most of them had to establish a united front. In fact, many of the nobles were still complaining about Rhodey's recklessness. They blamed him for killing Sienna and shedding all pretenses of cordiality with the royal family. However, they no longer had a choice. Rhodey's decisive actions had made them realize that this was not a matter that could be resolved by wrangling. The former Kingdom of Cairn had probably disappeared from this day onwards. Picaro City, which was originally inconspicuous in Ifta, became the center of all the whirlpools in the early spring of the year 590. Almost all the higher-ups of the country were involved, and the most unwilling one was the royal family, who was caught off guard. "Milner, I hope you can give me a reasonable explanation." Charles II's voice was not loud, but the coldness in his words made Count Milner shiver. He knelt on one knee in front of the Cairn monarch. His body trembled, but he did not know how to answer after a long time. In fact, if it was anyone else in his position, they would not know what to say. According to the original plan, once Sally died, the whole of Ifta would be in chaos. The royal family's forces would take advantage of the situation and easily control the entire territory. But now? His son was killed and beheaded in public, and Sally, who was supposed to be dead, was alive and kicking and made a declaration. She even made Ifta stand on the opposite side of the royal family. Milner suspected that she had gone crazy. Although Ifta's territory was not small, in terms of economy, military, population, and other factors, it could not reach the top in the kingdom. Coupled with the geographical factors, the production of food was not comparable to the central and southern parts of the kingdom. He could not figure out the reason why she did this. As long as the royal family simply controlled the trade to Ifta and suppressed her from all aspects, they would not even need to use force to make her admit defeat. But now, he did not have the time to wonder if Sally had gone crazy. He should be more concerned about his position in Charles II's heart. Your Majesty, that she is digging her own grave by making such a fuss. It is an indisputable fact that Ifta is strong on the outside but weak on the inside. I'm afraid there are too many coincidences involved in this incident. But since it has become like this, I will definitely teach her a lesson. Milner could only bite the bullet and promise. He was actually very confused. His only son was beheaded. Not only did he have nowhere to vent his anger, but he also had to suppress his anger and continue to deal with these messy matters. No one in his position could be so calm. As the king, Charles II naturally would not push all the responsibility to his subordinates. He was also good at managing his subordinate. After listening to Milner for a long time, he finally waved his hand and said, forget it. I shouldn't be angry with you. Let's leave it at that. I'm afraid you know what to do next better than me. I'll wait for your result." Milner felt as if he had been pardoned. Although he knew that this was the so-called emperor's mind, he still admired the way Charles II handled the situation. He lowered his head and made a few promises before leaving the king's study in a hurry. To him, avenging his son was probably the only thing he wanted to do for the rest of his life. Charles II's gaze was slightly lowered, and no emotion could be seen on his face. Although there was such a big mistake in the cooperation with the undead, it was not something he could not bear. The kingdom of Cairn was so big. So what if a few nobles died in a city? Compared to his ambition, it was insignificant. On the contrary, Ifta's torment was a good opportunity for him to unify the kingdom. What should disappear will eventually disappear, and what should be replaced will eventually be replaced. Charles II sighed and glanced at the map of the kingdom on the other side of the study. He then slowly closed his eyes. Ambition was something that a ruler would never lack. However, the silence in the study did not last long. An unexpected message made Charles II open his eyes. The envoy of the Lassiman Kingdom is here to visit? Yes, Your Majesty. The envoy's ship has just entered the territorial waters. They have also sent a ship to deliver a letter. Charles II raised his eyebrows when he heard the servant's stuttering words. What is it that you are not saying? Say it all at once. Your Majesty, their ship is not sailing in the water, the servant gulped and said in a low voice. According to the officers at the port, the ship is sailing in the air with magic. It was only when it was about to reach the port that the sorcerers on the ship controlled it to land in the water. A ship that can fly? Sorcerers? Charles II was shocked. However, he was a shrewd man. He sat up straight and did not do anything else. After a few seconds, he reached out his hand and said, "Give me the letter. You may leave now." Yes, Your Majesty. The study became quiet. However, Charles II stared blankly at the letter for a long time. He realized that this seemingly normal envoy's visit seemed to have an unusual meaning behind it. The Lassiman Kingdom was not a neighboring country. It was a country that was across the sea from the Kingdom of Karen. When Charles II grandfather was still on the throne, this country, which always spoke with a retroflex accent, had once sent an envoy to visit. Going further back, it seemed that the Lassiman Kingdom had relations with several countries that were the predecessors of the Kingdom of Karen. However, the most recent visit was about 40 years ago. If Charles II was not a monarch who liked to read the history books, he would not even know where the Lassiman Kingdom was. However, it was precisely because of this history that Charles II felt that something was wrong. He remembered that the Lassiman Kingdom was founded on religion. The establishment of the Viper Cross had something to do with the Lassiman Kingdom. 40 years ago, during the state visit, the envoy from the Lassiman Kingdom mentioned that the Lassiman Kingdom had fallen into a crisis of faith and was fighting against a group of crazy and evil sorcerers. At that time, the Lassiman Kingdom had come here in hopes that the Kingdom of Karen could provide them with some supplies. But now, it seemed that the Lassiman Kingdom had bid farewell to its religion. With this thought in mind, Charles II tore open the letter in his hand and saw a huge arcane rune imprint slowly activating. The rhythm of the elements permeated the surroundings. The seemingly empty letter was gradually formed by the elements of various colors and formed neat lines of words. Drawing the magic circle of the constant element condensation on a thin piece of paper was undoubtedly a show of power. However, Charles II was not a senior-rank sorcerer. He probably just felt that this way of writing a letter was creative. He shook the letter a little and continued reading. Founding celebration? They came all the way here just for this kind of thing. This is interesting. He gently folded the colorful letter, and his eyes became more and more profound. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.